Lorraine Menancy, our heroine's sister, was always the show's main character and was beloved by the whole world. In those moments when the sun sparkled in her golden locks and when her emerald eyes found another, she was like an angel. Her presence transformed the ordinary into the magical every day, and her voice was like the sound of a bell, gently caressing the ear. When she smiled, even the servants felt the light brighter, and the shadows around them disappeared, giving way to joy and hope. Lorraine was the heroine of every heart, and she remained a shining light, spoken of with admiration and envy. Her words were soft, like the whisper of the wind on a spring day, and her gaze could melt the ice in even the coldest hearts. Every time she appeared in the hall, everyone froze, as if there was a living magical light in front of them, illuminating everything around. Sienna, our heroine, was also a part of this world, and for her, her older sister was the whole universe. Sienna looked at her with admiration, and when Lorraine smiled, a feeling of boundless love and gratitude awoke in her sister's heart. And she sincerely believed that her sister valued her with the same dedication, and that she was her best friend, support, and light in any, even pitch darkness. Lorraine asked, "All people from the lower classes are like that," and she wouldn't refuse. It was her older sister's request, so Sienna would listen. She asked her father for forgiveness for this unreasonable child, and that there was not a drop of guilt in the fact that she was inferior. But one day everything changed, and Sienna saw the true face of her sister, who, as it turned out, hated her so much that she was ready to kill. Our heroine wondered if she had set her up simply because she felt she was a threat and could interfere with her plans. To which the sister replied that it was not only that, and she hastened to add that no one would rush to save Sienna. Having said that her sister loved only her while she hated her, Lorraine added that she wondered if the archduke would do anything, and no matter how painful it was to realize, our heroine had no choice but to admit her defeat and that her sister was right. Everyone really did treat her with disgust, considered her incapable of anything, and said that she had no business being in their family. They openly kicked her out of the house, accusing her of creating only problems while her older sister did only good. Sienna trusted her sister and followed her. She even tried to justify herself by saying that it was Lorraine who asked her to do so. But her opinion was simply ignored. No one wanted to listen to someone who was always on the sidelines and was just a shadow in someone else's life. Lorraine said she was happy because she could finally easily end her sister's miserable life with her own hands. However, Sienna did not want this to happen, so she took the decision into her own hands and said that her older sister was rejoicing too soon. Seeing the bottle of poison, Lorraine became furious. She frantically tried to understand how she managed to get it while sitting in prison. Her sister didn't give her any hints either. She just asked for forgiveness for not being able to allow her to finish what she started. And no matter how much Lorraine screamed, she could no longer change anything. Her attempts to fight her sister's choice were useless. In a fit of rage, she promised that Sienna would have a painful death because she could not let her get off so easily. Anger boiled inside her, causing her heart to beat faster and her mind to make dark plans for revenge, but circumstances played their role. Everything was decided without her participation, and now all that remained was to come to terms with what had been lost, and the bitter feeling of her own powerlessness fettered her soul. Sienna laughed and thought that she hadn't received love from anyone in all these years, but she was glad that at the last moment she was able to do it her way. Thus ended her life. There was something desperate and beautiful in this farewell act. She remained herself until the very last minute. However, she only hoped that everything had stopped. She could not even imagine that this was not the end, but a new beginning. The shadows of the past did not retreat, but only prepared for a new game. Fate seemed to be playing a joke on her, throwing her unexpected turns. What seemed like the end turned out to be just a door into an unknown corridor of change, which our heroine has yet to enter. Everything that seemed reliable and familiar was falling apart before her eyes, and she herself felt helpless and despairing, drowning in a deep abyss. She didn't understand how this could have happened. Her head was a chaos of thoughts and fragments of memories. Everything seemed like some kind of strange nightmare. But the most terrible question hovered in her soul. Why had fate treated her so cruelly? Would she really be stuck here forever? Sienna found herself back in the orphanage, and the director was once again telling his charges that as mages, they were obligated to protect this empire. He said that this was why they fed and clothed them, and Archduke Noct even honored their humble establishment with a visit. Our heroine remembered that this is exactly how it was on that memorable day, and she answered the director loudly that they understood everything perfectly. The Kendall orphanage where she lived was like other orphanages, the only difference being that it housed only future wizards. Since its founding, the Empire has waged a constant war against demonic creatures that constantly threaten its borders. For this reason, children capable of wielding magic were taken under the care of titled families and became an important resource in this struggle. So in reality, Sienna and Lorraine were not biological sisters, but only foster children of a noble family. They were supported by the Nacht clan, one of the three main defenders of the Empire and, to be more precise, the most noble of all nobles. But the young heroine was useless, or rather, she lacked abilities, so the talk around her person never ceased. People didn't understand why the archduke took her under his wing, even though she was a commoner, without normal magic, but she received sponsorship. Despite the fact that her older sister Lorraine is from the Menanzi family of counts, she is a real genius and also a sweet and kind girl. Sienna thought that this story had nothing to do with her anymore anyway, but for some reason, it all started again. In her past life, when she accidentally fell right in front of Archduke Nacht, he unexpectedly chose her. Then she was relieved that he was not angry, but she simply did not know what future the villainous fate had prepared for her. This moment became a turning point on which her life depended, but with each passing day she gradually understood the value of her new role. At first it seemed like a lucky break, a chance to emerge from obscurity and find protection in the person of an influential person. The only thing she could think about now was that she needed to behave in such a way as to simply not catch the Archduke's eye. But when His Excellency arrived, the children, as luck would have it, were lined up in one line, and she didn't even have anyone to hide behind. When the head of the family, Roderick, entered the room, she stopped breathing, all her fear concentrated in that imposing silhouette. Sienna tried to stay calm. She simply couldn't afford to make the same mistake. Every word could be decisive. Anxiety was seething inside her, but she kept a mask of composure on her face, trying not to reveal the slightest fear. She knew that the slightest mistake could cost her much more than just defeat. She could lose hope for a different future. In her mind, she told herself that everything would be fine. She just needed to be patient a little, and the main thing was not to attract his attention. Roderick's footsteps echoed loudly as they approached, echoing throughout the cold hall. At that moment, she prayed he would pass by without noticing her. Every second dragged on endlessly, and hundreds of thoughts raced through her head about how best to behave, how not to give herself away, how to survive. She closed her eyes, tried to calm her breathing and focus on the little things so as not to let fear take hold of her. But when she opened her eyes, she saw his shadow stopping right in front of her, and all her feelings faded under the weight of the moment. Roderick's gaze was attentive, as if he was trying to read her thoughts and understand her entire essence in just 1 second. It was a test that could change everything. She hoped it was just a coincidence, but then she heard the loud voice of the director. His words sounded harsh and unkind, clearly not approving of the Archduke's choice, but Roderick did not pay attention to the exclamation. Calmly, almost emotionlessly, he asked the girl if she would go with him to the Nacht family, and at that moment the whole room held its breath. She understood that the answer she was about to give would determine her fate for many years to come, but she did not want to repeat her mistakes. Despite the fear, a shadow of determination flared in her heart, no longer to be a pawn in someone else's game, but to become the master of her own life. He was surrounded by cold, as if he had just returned home on a foggy night, and a terrifying mana filled the space like a heavy cloud. Without a doubt, such was Archduke Nacht. Even after the Founding Fathers' campaigns of conquest, the world still struggled with demonic creatures. In this world where the boundaries between light and darkness were thin, he was not just a warrior or an aristocrat, he was the embodiment of strength. Mages were an important resource for an empire that was at war, their power and knowledge becoming a key weapon. For this reason, aristocrats took even commoners under their wing if they were found to be sensitive to magic. Receiving sponsorship was like a ticket to high society, and it became common practice among aristocrats to marry their own children to adopted children. So the nobility created a stronger bloodline with the help of their wards, but their guardian and his sisters was simply an incredible person. There were 3 great families in the Empire: Eros, who protected the heavens, Ferrato, who guarded the waters, and Nacht, who guarded and protected the earth. He was an aristocrat to the core, the commander of a 10,000-strong army of magicians. And why would such a man pay attention to her? She didn't know, but when he asked her name, the girl decided that perhaps if she didn't make this contact, he would leave her alone. She didn't want to speak. Fear and uncertainty paralyzed her. Silence seemed like a safe shield, barely holding back the storm of emotions. However, her silence only increased the tension in the room. The other children were also worried, but the archduke did not look impatient. Rather, there was a judicious assessment in his gaze, as if he was weighing not the words, but the very essence of the girl standing before him. Feeling increasingly uneasy, she thought that this couldn't go on forever. She would have to decide something anyway. Gathering up the last of her courage, she took a deep breath, ready to accept the inevitable, curtsying, and quietly said her name. Then the archduke said her name in a calm tone and repeated his question whether she wanted to go with him to his family. She heard tenderness and patience in his voice, which was unexpected for her, because before this he seemed cold and inaccessible. Something had changed, but agreeing to his proposal was like digging her own grave. Was it worth it for her to go back there? She was afraid to agree. This path promised freedom, but at the same time also a repetition of the past, which would end so tragically for her. The girl's thoughts were torn between hope and apprehension, between the desire to believe and fear, but the worst thing was her dizziness. Sienna felt herself slowly sinking to the floor. She barely heard his worried voice asking if she could get up. She barely audibly answered that no, but she wanted to say more. She should have refused, but the words seemed to get stuck in her throat. He watched her slowly sink to the floor, and his expression changed, his usual coldness softening to give way to alarm. The archduke was a man who rarely allowed himself to show emotion in front of strangers, but now the situation demanded attention. His concern was not feigned. Something in her condition was beyond the ordinary. Children do not just faint like that. Opening her eyes slightly, she saw a slight confusion on his face and was a little surprised, not understanding why he was so worried about her. His gaze was softer than she expected, and there was a genuine concern in it that seemed unusual in his cold appearance. She felt a little better, but it lasted only for a moment. She thought that she must have imagined it. He didn't care about her state of health. Before consciousness slipped away from her again, she realized that she didn't want to go back. She didn't want to find herself in that story again. In her imagination, the girl returned to the day when she first met Lorraine. Everything was so vivid, as if it had happened yesterday. Sienna liked this girl, a little older than her, and liked that she threw away conventions, citing the fact that they were both wards. And although she was at first a little surprised when she suggested calling her sister, she was still happy. It was said so sincerely. This small gesture of hope became an unexpected gift for her in the sea of uncertainty of this new and strange world. From then on, a strong bond developed between them. Like a quiet refuge in the chaos around her, Lorraine was more than just a sister to Sienna. She became a person who shared her worries and dreams, and in the new conditions of life, such support seemed invaluable. But Sienna still didn't know that their friendship would be the beginning of a chain of events that would change her life forever and lead to tragedy. Lorraine became an older sister with whom they spent a lot of time together, and tea parties became a good tradition. One day, she invited Sienna to go with her to the family's villa. In the summer, her parents said they would be curious to meet the girl. For an orphan, it was a real gift to feel like part of a real family, even if only for a short time. A summer trip to Lorraine's family villa promised to escape the gray everyday life and open the door to a world Sienna could only dream of. She received the warm welcome, cozy evenings, and atmosphere filled with care, with gratitude, and a slight hope for a better future. The Count and Countess were delighted that the girl had found such an easy connection with their daughter. They saw another member of the family in Sienna. Lorraine herself behaved very friendly and relaxed with our heroine, trying to fill her days with joy and meaning. These warm moments of communication became a real outlet for Sienna, which she remembered for a long time, and even gave her a doll. Sienna was touched by this attitude because she, rootless and alone, was treated with genuine warmth and care. One night that summer, Lorraine came to her. The silence of the house was so thick that even the rustle of her footsteps seemed loud. The sister did not come empty-handed. She was holding a tattered tome and said that she would like to do something before going to bed. Half asleep, Sienna didn't quite understand why her sister came with this question at night. It seemed strange and unexpected. Her mind was not yet fully awake, and she fought the urge to just close her eyes again and forget about everything. But Lorraine insisted. There was a sincerity and tenderness in her older sister's voice that made Sienna put aside her doubts and listen. Lorraine offered to try, and realizing that she was so impatiently awaiting her answer, she took a deep breath and nodded in agreement. Pointing to the pictogram, she began to read. It described how to share magical abilities with another person. A delicate and rare process that required trust and great caution, our heroine, wary, asked again. Then Lorraine gently replied that she wanted to pass on a piece of light magic to her sweet little sister, explaining that Sienna had no magic of her own. But with the help of this gift, she will be able to gain the strength and protection that a future magician needs so much. Upon hearing this, our heroine was upset. She never dared to think that she turned out to be an empty shell, because the Archduke took her under his wing only because he believed that she had magic. In order not to cause him problems, she firmly decided that she would definitely reveal her talent and develop magical abilities. Lorraine touchingly convinced her that she didn't have to worry because she had a lot of strength that she could share with her. She spoke softly and confidently, trying to dispel all doubts and fears, as if she wanted to give her little sister self-confidence. But Sienna still doubted it to her. It all seemed like a kind of deception. How could one take someone else's powers without having one's own? Lorraine continued to insist, assuring them that this was not just a transfer of power, but an act of trust, and that together they could overcome difficulties. This step seemed wrong, so the older sister asked if she really wanted to go back to the orphanage. Lorraine's words caught Sienna off guard, causing her to wonder what she feared more: accepting help or being left alone. Moreover, until now no one had been as kind to her as her sister, so she wanted to stay close to her at all costs. Ultimately, succumbing to Lorraine's persuasion and gentle persistence, our heroine decided to do as her older sister ordered. She allowed herself to believe that together they could overcome any challenge and that this step could be the beginning of something new and bright. Her sister told her that she did the right thing and that it would be their little secret, and she didn't have to worry about anyone finding out about it. And only years later, Sienna bitterly realized how wrong it had been to trust the tenderness and promises of that time turned out to be just a trap. It was the one who seemed like an older sister and support to her who deceived her, betrayed her, and destroyed everything she once so naively believed in. This pain of betrayal was deeper than any disappointment. Now she knew that she could not rely on anyone but herself. The day she traveled back in time, Sienna was determined that she was not going to get involved with Lorraine anymore. She had to become stronger, learn to survive on her own, and not let anyone take advantage of her trust again. It was a decision to take her destiny into her own hands, let the past remain a lesson, and let her build the future according to her own rules. Our heroine could not allow history to repeat itself, and so, upon waking up, she returned to her nightmarish life. When she came to, she heard words addressed to Sir Marnan Kendall, informing him that a thorough investigation had been carried out, and it was determined that he was unfit to perform his official duties and was suspended from service from that day on. Before a decision was made about his future fate, the director of the orphanage began to convince the Archduke that he was not guilty of anything. His words sounded confident, but for the Archduke they were just excuses. He was not going to listen to lies and justifications. The girl's fate depended on his decision, and he was ready to make it, guided not by emotions, but by cold reason and duty. While she was unconscious, he discussed what had caught his attention, how she had flinched from his hand and lost consciousness. Perhaps he imagined it, or perhaps it was really connected to strong excitement and worries that she could not control. That look, that reaction made Roderick think, even though she was an orphanage ward, she looked much worse than she should have. Her thinness was striking, as was the condition of the other children. He could not believe that the funds allocated were not enough for normal nutrition. After all, these children were not just orphans, they were part of a program, and each of them had a special significance for the future of the state. Funding for the shelter was allocated at a high level, and the amount was supposed to be more than sufficient to cover all needs. If there had been any financial problems, they would have been noticed long ago and reported to the authorities, and the director would have been completely obsessed with money. In such cases, the Empire does not tolerate negligence, especially when it comes to the future of forces on which it places great hopes. Therefore, the Archduke, turning to the director, said that perhaps he did not know, but children with magical abilities are extremely rare. They, like Roderick himself, constitute the military resource of the empire and therefore must not be allowed to be damaged or wasted under any circumstances. He was found to be unfit to perform his official duties and was suspended from that date until further notice. He began to get indignant, trying to justify himself and blame the circumstances, but the Archduke was not going to waste time on explanations. Roderick had no intention of going into details. He saw that there was something more behind the simple situation, and he decided to act decisively. He ordered the director to be taken away, and his cold and firm gaze indicated that he would not allow any excuses or subterfuges. Sir Kendall protested. He said that this shelter was his property, and even if he was 3 times an archduke, he had no right to it. Nacht interrupted him mid-sentence and said that if he continued talking, not only his property but also his life itself would be in danger. These words sounded like a warning in which there was no room for objection. Then, without changing his tone, he added that there was no need to delay. And without further ado, he ordered the director to be escorted to the exit, forcing him to leave the room with a feeling of helplessness and confusion. Meanwhile, our heroine, without taking her eyes off, carefully watched the actions of the Archduke, catching his every gesture and word. She still had too little understanding of what she wanted to see in this cold and powerful man, what was hidden behind his icy gaze. A vague anxiety was drowning in her soul, which thickened only at the mere thought that she would have to enter his house. She tried to figure out the meaning of his expression, why it was so cold and stern. Perhaps he was disappointed by her weakness. At that moment, it seemed to her that he might change his mind after what had happened. Then this was her chance to make him change his mind. Deep down, she decided to try to play on his expectations, to pretend to be weak, hoping that then he would not take her under his wing. In that case, she would be able to stay in the shelter, where, despite all the difficulties, her life was at least somewhat familiar and predictable. Sienna asked Lissa, the teacher, if she could stay home and promise to behave well and eat less in exchange. Then, in an even more pitiful tone, she added that from that day on, she would begin to take care of the younger ones and would henceforth always obey her elders. Lissa turned to the Archduke, saying that the girl was still little. That was why she was behaving like that. Sienna must have been scared when she learned about her departure. The teacher explained this by saying that the child was very attached to this place, but when he calmed down, she would be able to explain everything to her. However, our heroine, feeling that her plan was falling apart, could not contain her emotions. At first she quietly whined, trying to show her despair. But soon the tears gave way to real hysteria, sobs with which she tried to express the full depth of her fear. Her feelings touched the teacher's heart, and overcome with emotion, she asked if Sienna was really that upset. The Archduke's assistant decided to intervene. He approached Lissa and quietly told her that if she cried, the girl would become even more frightened. He reminded her that it was important to remain calm and lead by example, and Lissa nodded understandingly and tried to pull herself together. The man added that Sir Nacht would not forcibly take a child who did not want to leave, and asked Roderick to confirm his words. The Archduke's voice was calm, he respected her feelings, and had no intention of causing her any unnecessary suffering until she was ready. Our heroine waited with bated breath to see how events would develop further, and when she heard these words, she breathed a sigh of relief. However, as soon as the tears stopped and she stopped crying, all the attention of those gathered turned to her. Every glance, every movement was now directed in her direction, and she realized that she had relaxed too obviously. But this was not part of her plans at all. She needed to continue pretending, so that no one would have even a shadow of doubt about her sincerity. Every movement she made now had to convince those around her that she was truly afraid of getting used to the new world. Sienna tried to make her emotions as real as possible in order to play this role masterfully, because her future depended on it. Her heart was still filled with anxiety, and fear became her shield, her only defense against the changes she feared. When she heard the Archduke say that he would leave today, she thought with hope that she had really succeeded, and that she would not have to leave. Excitement was intertwined with relief. It seemed that all her pretense had finally played the necessary role, and she had managed to convince the stern judge. She even thought that everything turned out to be quite simple, and at that moment Lissa asked if she was really that scared. Sienna looked up and thought that she had caused such a fuss, but the teacher really cared about her and her gaze was so warm. When I heard the words that she shouldn't shed tears because she was so beautiful, I thought that maybe this is what sincere consolation looks like. Our heroine once again realized that all of Sister Lorraine's actions, covered with kind words and a kind smile, were a trick. Behind the outward care lay a cold game designed to deceive and subjugate, and the thought made her heart clench with bitterness. She felt the chill of betrayal creep through her skin, leaving a painful mark. Her trust was undermined. But besides the burning hatred and bloodthirsty thoughts, another, deeper need smoldered in her heart. She wanted to know the truth. Sienna understood that without an answer to this question, no peace would be possible for her, and no reconciliation with the past would be possible. She also knew that it was on that summer day, at the estate of Lorraine's parents, that fate was determined only one could receive this gift. On her last day, gathering all her strength, Sienna decided to ask her sister this question. She was determined to get to the bottom of the truth. This question was not just curiosity or an impulse, it became for her a kind of key to the answers she had been looking for so long. Lorraine just smiled when she heard the question. Her laughter was light and mocking. The situation even seemed funny to her. There was a hint of superiority in that laughter, as if the truth itself was so obvious that one only had to open one's eyes. She was even surprised that it took her sister so long to reach this thought, and the realization of the truth was a surprise to her. Her eyes gleamed with a cold fire as she said, almost tenderly, that Sienna might have been deluded for too long. Thus, the calculating sister confirmed her darkest suspicions that, through deception and cunning, Lorraine had stolen her magical abilities. And as painful as it was to realize, Sienna now clearly saw the whole truth. All her life she had been deceived by her older sister's false warmth. At that moment, the last illusions disappeared, and a new, harsh path opened up before her, a path without deception, but also without trust. The teacher's question brought her back to reality when she asked what she was thinking about and whether her fears were still troubling her. After thanking Lissa for her support, our heroine wondered if her life would have been better if she had stayed with the teacher. Feeling her charge's little heart beating, Lissa noted to herself that she was still too pale after fainting. Her fragile condition could not help but cause concern, and the teacher's soul was filled with genuine care and concern. She thought that perhaps it would be better to let the archduke take Sienna for the girl's sake, but she would stay to look after her. The director burst into the room and destroyed this quiet idol without holding back his emotions. He took out all his anger on the girl. He blamed her for all the troubles of the orphanage and, showing cruelty in every word, his rage spreading only tension and fear around. He screamed that he wouldn't leave it like that, and the girl and the teacher couldn't figure out how he ended up there, since they themselves saw him being taken away. The director suddenly grabbed the girl by the hair and began to roughly torment her, like a defenseless little dog. His hands were squeezing the strands tightly, causing her pain. She tried to break free, but his grip did not even allow her to raise her head. Sienna was shaking with fear and humiliation. The teacher could not calmly watch such tyranny and intervened, asking them to stop. However, he did not even listen. His rage was too strong. Ignoring the pleas, he continued to treat the girl cruelly. He intended to take out all his anger on her because it was her fault he was caught, and she didn't know what kind of bribe he had to pay. Continuing to shake her like a doll, the director shouted that because of her he had lost all his property, and for this he would sell her into slavery. The tense atmosphere in the room grew so intense that it seemed as if something completely irreparable was about to happen. At this critical moment, another knock appeared at the door, and with his imperious demand, he immediately extinguished all the director's anger. His cold gaze quickly assessed the situation, and without further ado, he stepped inside, stopping the merciless actions with one powerful blow. The director's body flew to the side. Deathly silence reigned in the room. The new guest did not allow anyone to doubt his power. His strength and determination were obvious, and no one dared to contradict him. The girl looked at her savior with slight trepidation. Nacht's gaze fell on Sienna, and she saw no anger in those eyes, only unwavering severity and cold concern. It was a sense of responsibility, as if he understood the fragility of her situation and was aware of the role he had to fulfill. She recognized him. It was the Archduke's eldest son, Lord Aziel, and as far as she remembered, he was not one to be easily angered. And it was at the same time a little scary and surprising for her to see in him not only a powerful lord, but also her protector. She wanted to thank him, but the Archduke's sudden return confused her a little, and she did not dare approach the lord. Our heroine thought that there were already too many events today, and besides, she still felt a little weak. On Sir Nacht's orders, the director was dragged out of the room again, and she found herself thinking that events were moving too quickly. Her thoughts were torn between the past and the present, and although Lorraine had not yet betrayed her, she was already drawn into a conflict with the director. This thought made it even more difficult. What kind of life is this for her, where everything changes so quickly, and where no one gives her a break? She felt as if she had lost control of her destiny, and again could do nothing to change the course of events. The world around her seemed like a whirlpool, pulling her deeper and deeper, leaving only a feeling of helplessness. But then the Archduke returned, and everything was resolved as if by magic, his mere appearance once again putting an end to the chaos. But with him came back that strange feeling of being a child under Nacht's care, a mixture of abandonment and protection at the same time. At that moment, Sienna felt that although her fate seemed unpredictable, to some extent it was predetermined. The girl felt completely helpless and confused. The teacher noticed this and hurried to her to calm her down. She sat down softly next to her, hugging Sienna by the shoulders, and said in a warm voice that the poor thing was so scared that she couldn't even cry. These words were said with such feeling that our heroine felt a little better. Maybe in this unpredictable world, there is a place for hope. The Archduke's henchman cleared his throat to attract attention and said that the girl seemed to be really shocked. However, he added that he believed it would now be difficult for her to remain in this shelter, so a decision had to be made. The girl was not surprised when the Archduke addressed her. It was clear to her that the opinions and decisions of adults were no longer separate from her fate. There was a knowing look in her eyes, as if she already knew what was coming next and was prepared to accept any outcome. Roderick repeated his question, firmly and calmly, without hiding his intention. He asked if she would like to go with him. The girl looked at him with wide eyes, surprised at how unexpectedly he showed his feelings, or rather distant echoes. It was the first time she had seen him openly display such emotions, and there was a slight mixture of curiosity and caution in her gaze. It suddenly occurred to her that maybe she had misunderstood something in the past, and that her magical talent was actually better than she thought. He saw her hidden abilities and immediately took her, later stopped paying attention to her, simply because he became disappointed. Our heroine understood that it was absurd to count on support when you had no talent. After all, he said that Lorraine was a genius. The Archduke acted indifferent to everything, as if everything that was happening was alien to him, as if he was devoid of any sensitivity. But she was fine, continuing, despite everything, to sincerely believe that she was still able to receive at least a piece of her sister's light magic. She felt like she was deceiving her guardian and didn't deserve his attention, so she was simply grateful that she wasn't kicked out. She couldn't quite believe that she had been abandoned, and yet she was grateful for the opportunity to simply not disappear from this story. Feeling guilty for deceiving her, the girl tried her best to do everything possible, anything that could prove her sincerity. Sienna knew she had to show she was trustworthy, no matter how small it seemed, so she carried out all the instructions. Lorraine, noting that they now had similar handwriting, asked to answer her letters, and our heroine always agreed. It was a small but important bridge for her into a world where every little action seemed significant to her and brought her closer to Lorraine. She combed her sister's hair, trying to do it carefully and gently, because such little things proved her sincere affection to her. But for the others, this was still not enough. Their gazes remained cold, and their expectations seemed too much for her. Every action was perceived as a drop in the ocean, a small step that was not always enough to gain recognition. It was bitter for her to admit that they were right, that she was only an eternally trying but still worthless person. All their words only confirmed her own doubts that she had no strength or talent, and that all her efforts were just futile attempts. Lorraine, taking advantage of her trusting nature, once arranged everything so that she managed to let her down in front of her guardian. Small words, subtle hints, and false accusations formed a chain that significantly influenced the perception of others. It was a cunning and cold betrayal, so the Archduke immediately put her in prison, and that's how it all ended last time. Sienna decided that she had to try to change the future, even despite the fear of unpredictable consequences. She was acutely aware that if she deviated too much from past events, it would be very difficult to predict what would happen next. But that was her only hope. She had to find a way to avoid the fate that already seemed predetermined. Moreover, a new director will be sent to the shelter in any case, and there is no guarantee that this person will be better than the previous one. He may be involved in human trafficking or something more sinister, leaving a trail of fear and destruction in his wake. And if she accepts Nacht's invitation and goes with him to the family, then in 6 months she will meet Lorraine, whom she loved more than life. But this thought was especially painful for her to meet the one who had so cruelly betrayed her, meant coming face to face with the past. Hope and fear intertwined, creating a sense of struggle between the desire to return and the fear of being betrayed again. But the current her wasn't going to just let this happen. Her plan wouldn't work because she wouldn't love her anymore. This thought seemed to become her shield, and at the same time Shackles, our heroine, understood that the past could no longer be returned. And those feelings disappeared forever. Now her heart is hard and cold, and she is ready to do everything to protect herself from further pain. The love for Lorraine, which had once seemed to her the meaning of life, had now turned into a decaying ember. Sienna was determined to go with Archduke Nacht and, when she turned 15, to enter the military academy. She just had to hold out until then, but that meant that she would now have to part with her teacher, Lissa. The separation could not be avoided, and her heart sank with a premonition of pain when Lissa asked her why she did not go with the Archduke. She then added that she was very sorry that she couldn't protect the girl, but she wanted her to take advantage of the opportunity that had come her way. Now, as the final hour approached, Sienna felt her hands instinctively clench and tears well up in her eyes. She knew that everything would be different after this, that her path would change forever, and she gathered her courage to endure the separation. To everyone's surprise, Lord Asriel asked why Miss Melage wasn't appointed as the new headmistress, explaining that she was a worthy candidate. His voice was calm, but there was a firmness and confidence in it, as if he had complete faith in her abilities. This proposal was taken up by the assistant, who added that, quite conveniently, the estate was located not far from here, so they would be able to see each other. The Archduke paused, as if trying to weigh the pros and cons, considering how beneficial this proposal was for his plans. A sudden spark of hope flared inside Sienna, and she thought that in that case she wouldn't want to leave the shelter. But at the same time, she understood that this still did not change one fact. If she stayed, Lissa would not get this position. The last minutes were the hardest for our heroine. The carriage was already waiting, but she couldn't tear herself away from Lissa. She, as if sensing her anxiety and pain, quietly and tenderly reassured the girl, saying that everything would be fine, that it was for her own good. Sienna listened to the teacher's words, trying to remember each of them, as if clinging to the last sliver of hope. The assistant thought that the girl had become completely dejected, if only the gentleman would personally carry her to the carriage so that she could feel his attitude towards her. A quiet hope arose in his soul that such a gesture could change her mood a little, and he quietly told Roderick about it. Moreover, he even showed how to do it. The Archduke listened attentively and, chuckling meaningfully, agreed with this idea. However, the girl was not ready for this. She caught herself thinking that she still continued to hope that she would not have to leave. And although he held out his hands to her, she could not make up her mind. Before her mind's eye there was still that Archduke, detached from everything. She didn't want to, and was afraid of returning to his estate. Memories of reserved looks and heavy silence again surfaced before her eyes. Fear was growing inside her. She was afraid not only of new trials, but also of the irreversible losses that she had already had to endure. Her whole being resisted this return, but the circumstances were stronger, and the girl clung to Lissa more and more. The teacher, saying that Sienna had never behaved like this before, apologized and asked for another minute to talk. Having seated her in the carriage, the miss asked her pupil to promise her one thing, and she, becoming even more embarrassed, asked what it was. Lissa smiled and said that she would come to visit her often, so she should enjoy life and continue to be kind. Accept the Archduke's kindness and be sure to be happy. These words sounded soft, but they contained an insistent request. This was the last warm, parting word that she took with her as she set out on a journey where trials, doubts, and perhaps new discoveries awaited. And even as fear tried to overcome her, she thought that if Lissa believed that she could be happy, then there was a chance. Although it was small, it was still capable of changing her fate, and our heroine thanked the teacher for her kindness and concern. The carriages set off, and the wheels rustled on the packed road, creating a monotonous rhythm, a reminder of the inevitability of fate. The wind gently rustled the leaves on the side of the road, and the fresh morning air filled the space with a sense of impending change. There was silence inside. Everyone was immersed in their own thoughts, and she wondered if she should thank him for saving her. But for some reason, right now, she didn't want to do it. She felt too tired, as if all her energy had dried up. The atmosphere around seemed to turn away from words of gratitude, filled with a gloomy silence that weighed on the soul. At times like these, it seemed to her that silence was the best expression of gratitude until she could find inner peace. For now, she only understood one thing, that she was no longer going to be perfect. It was better to give herself the right to just remain as she was. Our little heroine was indeed very tired. Her day had turned out to be even more eventful than others could have imagined. To the rhythmic sound of the wheels, she fell asleep quietly and did not hear how they approached the estate. The Archduke decided not to disturb her sleep. Carefully supporting her in his arms, the Archduke lifted her up and slowly carried her to the entrance of the house. The servants were already making a noise around. Some were clicking door locks, others were fussing, trying to get everything ready as quickly as possible. He quietly asked them to be quieter so as not to wake her, because she was so tired and could wake up at any moment. When his eldest son asked if he could help, he refused and asked if he knew if her room was ready. Asile, not very well hiding his displeasure, muttered that the butler should have prepared her room for their arrival. The Archduke caught his son's tone and, to stop any further conversation, asked if Asile had any business planned. He wanted to get off topic and focus on important matters, so as not to let his son get bogged down in empty arguments. He replied that everything was fine, although the thought flashed through his head that he was very busy, but for some reason he could not move away from her even for a step. At that moment, their attention was drawn to the voice of Sir Nacht's youngest son, Michael, who was eagerly awaiting their return from the orphanage. He knew perfectly well why they were going there, so his voice sounded excited, and there was genuine joy in it. The young lord felt that there was something important he had yet to learn, so he hurried up the steps to the elders. And he ran so fast that the worried maid asked him to be careful, because he might fall and upset his father. Ignoring the servants' lamentations, he pounced on the Archduke with questions, and the first of them was, "It's her." My lord, looking at him reproachfully, said that the young gentleman was behaving more than strangely, and then asked him to behave more quietly. This was said in such a tone that the young lord felt embarrassed, but this state quickly passed, because he so wanted to know all the details. And he pestered his older brother with his questions about how old the girl was, whether she would stay in their house, and what her name was. Asile decided to satisfy the younger man's curiosity, and answered in a slightly condescending tone that she was only 1 year older than him. Michael thought for a moment, and as if thinking out loud, said that for some reason that was exactly what he thought, and then began asking questions again. He had already outlined new topics for conversation, because he was interested to know what the future held for her and whether she would stay in their house. When I asked if I would live in the house, I received a positive answer, and although the question was simple, his eyes expressed genuine interest. Looking at the younger one with curiosity, Asile noticed something unusual in his behavior, something that was not at all typical for him. Lingering his gaze on his face a little longer than usual, he caught himself thinking that in her presence, he himself was a little out of sorts. Then I thought that my father's behavior wasn't much different either, which in itself went beyond just being a little unusual. And he became curious about why this was happening, and he began to think about what exactly was causing such a strong reaction in him. He really wasn't the type of person to get angry easily, but still, when he saw Sienna being grabbed by that nasty director, he couldn't hold back. The mere thought of how someone dared to hurt her made him angry even now, and a storm began to rage inside him. He felt he had to protect her because otherwise he wouldn't be able to get rid of the feeling that he had left her alone at her most difficult moment. He was surprised by how strong the emotions were, as if a wave of rage and anxiety he had never experienced so intensely before was pounding through him. His thoughts were interrupted by his father's words that it was time for them to go, that they shouldn't disturb her while she was resting, and these words seemed to cool his raging feelings. He understood that his father was right, that now she needed peace. It was more important to give her time to come to her senses and leave all these vivid experiences in the past. Asile looked at Sienna carefully, his gaze filled with a mixture of concern and thoughts about the future. He wondered what her life would be like in their home, and whether he and his family would be able to avoid the mistakes that had once been made. He hoped that this story could turn out differently, that they could help her find peace and a future without repeating the mistakes of the past. But uncertainty remained in his soul, because he could not know for sure. Everything depended on their decisions and the strength to stay on the right path. Our heroine's dream was filled with anxiety and worry, into which obsessive memories of the past continued to roll. Even in her sleep she heard her sister's voice, so quiet yet insistent, like the ringing of a bell. awakening inner fears. But she couldn't understand where that voice was coming from or where exactly she was. Everything was blurry, like a shadow, without clear outlines. Except for one thing, despite everything, she knew for sure that it was Lorraine's voice. This voice could never be lost or forgotten. He was a part of her, like a rotting root that had taken root in her heart, and at the same time, like an integral part of her pain and hope. The sister repeated the words over and over again, like a spell, which was supposed to unbalance her, that she still hated her. Her eyes were filled with fierce rage, and her voice was full of poisonous coldness. Lorraine was rude and persistent. She asked if Sienna really hoped to take her place, as if she could already sense the thought destroying her from the inside. All her burning hatred oozed through her words, leaving the feeling that with this betrayal she had lost everything, even her soul. Our heroine woke up, and the dream still completely took over her mind. Her eyes were a little watery, and everything inside was clenched with confusion. It was so bright and intense that she couldn't tell if it was real or just an illusion reflecting her subconscious. In her mind, she tried to replay every moment of the dream, as if she was afraid that one day it would disappear and leave only emptiness. She was relieved for a moment to realize it was just a nightmare, but became alarmed again when she realized she was in the cradle of the moon. It was the room where Lorraine had lived in the past, but she lived in another one, and the memories came flooding back with renewed vigor. The day she first saw her own room, her heart rejoiced with happiness. It was so wonderful to have her own corner. Now she could feel safe, and this joy was not even overshadowed by Lorraine, who was in a hurry to show off her quarters. The sister seemed to be trying to emphasize her superiority. Her gaze showed self-satisfaction with the spaciousness and magnificence of the room. She said that the Luna's cradle, which was assigned to her, was the best room, and it came immediately after the private quarters of the archduke and his sons. There was pride and satisfaction in her voice, as if it were a personal achievement, and she also added that there was a servant's corner. Lorraine considered these chambers the ideal place for herself, and her words conveyed a desire to secure her right to comfort and coziness. At the time, Sienna thought it was so sweet that she would be able to play in her older sister's room and even spend the night in that corner. Although she still felt a little uncomfortable when Lorraine was able to so calmly persuade the guardian to allocate these chambers. Our heroine understood that this was not entirely right, but she was too naive and loved her sister too much to express her opinion. Now, waking up in the moon's cradle, she felt awkward, as if she shouldn't be there. In those days, she often slept in the maid's room rather than in her own, and she wondered if that was why her sister came to her in her dreams. The moment from the dream came back to her mind when Lorraine asked if the younger one was really aiming to take her place in the house. However, Sienna didn't need someone else's place. She was just going to keep a low profile and then enroll in a military academy. So she thought that if she stayed in this room, there might be a misunderstanding, and she didn't want that at all. She felt that the sooner she left, the sooner she could arrange her life so that no one could interfere with her. And without hesitation, she decided to leave these chambers, not only to keep her secret, but also to prepare for what awaited her. She quietly left the room and headed through the deserted corridors to the very room that in her previous life had been her refuge. Her heart beat faster as she tried to remember at least the pattern on the walls, where she could previously feel a little peace and quiet. With every step she took, she felt a part of her past awakening inside her, and she so wanted to forget all the unnecessary memories. Lost in her dark memories, she accidentally tripped and fell, acutely feeling the unexpected blow and pain. Remaining on the floor, she took a deep breath, trying to shake off the wave of fear and confusion for a moment. She even felt panicked. But she knew that she had to keep going, and the pain wouldn't stop her. She just had to pull herself together and move forward again, no matter what. Along the way, she tried several times to estimate what time it was, but the only thing she knew for sure was that it was well past midnight. Sienna didn't meet a single living soul, which didn't particularly surprise her. This part of the estate was always rather deserted and cool, and her room was generally considered the coldest, but she still felt joy because she had finally found it. Her refuge. This small island of solitude became a temporary salvation for her, where she could at least take a little rest and gather her strength. Feeling the cold taking over her entire body, she felt relief, although she understood that this was only the very beginning of a new journey. There would still be many difficult decisions ahead, but now, at least for a moment, she could just take a break from this difficult path. The next morning arrived, and the sun's rays softly penetrated through the curtains, and the singing of birds lifted the spirits of the household. The head maid, recently appointed here, has not yet fully grasped all the secrets and intricacies of this large estate. Deborah walked out into the corridor, still feeling slightly confused. She had learned that the archduke had brought in a new man the day before. This news filled her with a mixture of curiosity and caution about who she was and what role she would now play in the life of this venerable house. The maid hoped to meet the future mistress and archduchess, but the butler said that she was a girl from an orphanage. He was also a little disappointed, but said that the girl must have incredible talent since she was given the Luna cradle. After a short pause, he added that since the gentleman was deeply interested in the guest, he advised everyone to give her a warm welcome. As Deborah knocked on the door, she thought how incredible she was to be placed in the moon's cradle, which was against all the rules. There was no answer, so the maid did not wait for such a guest to wake up and abruptly burst into the room. However, to her surprise, she found no one there, which first made her feel confused and then worried. The worst thoughts flashed through her head. Suddenly, the young lady had disappeared or, even worse, gone missing, but she couldn't allow that to happen. Allowing the girl to disappear on the very first day, and therefore immediately calling other servants to begin searching the estate. Excitement overwhelmed her, and she was already imagining various scenarios when she was informed that they had searched everywhere, but could not find the guest. Deborah knew she had to tell her master about this, but when she voiced it, the other servants began to warn her against this step. However, she realized that if she did not report the girl missing now, the consequences could be much more severe. The frightened servants suggested searching some more, but the maid had a good reason for holding her position and approached all matters responsibly. She barked, "Were they all going crazy? Because the archduke personally brought this girl and also gave her the best chambers in the entire estate. And they are so afraid for their worthless places that they are going to hide it. They at least realize how it will end." Guessing what a stir this loss could cause, she decided that in such an important matter the decision should be made by the owner. In all cases, Deborah did not want to take responsibility for an orphanage child, even if the archduke himself brought her into the house. When Roderick found out that Sienna was missing, he was beside himself and angrily asked what they were all doing. Did he personally have to make sure that a nanny was assigned to the child? And Deborah replied that she had no excuse. And she thought to herself that since the archduke was so angry, then apparently this girl was a more important person than she had initially thought. Falling to her knees, she began to lament that she was very ashamed, but the servants were already looking for the girl throughout the estate and would definitely find her soon. My lord was extremely unhappy that he had been torn away from his work, but he was even more angry with himself for not having supervised everything himself. Only he felt the importance of this child, so he had to go look for her, although he stunned the maid with his unusual decision. The butler, seeing the gentleman for an hour surrounded by wary servants, was extremely surprised this had happened for the first time in many years. He guessed what reason had brought the archduke to this part of the estate at such an hour, so he asked what the orders would be. However, Deborah answered his question, informing him that the archduke had expressed a desire to join the search for the young lady. This wish went against the estate's rules, so the servants immediately began to question who this girl from the orphanage was. No one really dared to ask this question directly, but suspicions arose that she might have some connection with the emperor. The butler could not allow such rumors to spread throughout the house, and in order to stop these conversations, he asked everyone to return to the search. The archduke could not explain to himself why so many servants could not find one single child. He had reason to worry, because dangerous ancient magic was stored down there, and he couldn't let the girl wander around here alone. He felt that the magic hidden below did not tolerate mistakes, and every minute the girl was absent could greatly complicate the situation. He felt a growing sense of responsibility for her safety, and the voice of reason insistently urged him to find her at any cost. All sorts of thoughts flashed through his head, and it seemed to him that he could no longer afford to hesitate, otherwise everything might get out of control. At that moment, Roderick felt his worry and anxiety about the girl echo somewhere in the back of his mind and feelings. He realized that it was time to trust something greater, his inner instinct, and the butler advised Deborah to follow the master. The servants, who had been working in the house for a long time, knew that at such moments it was not worth disturbing him, and it was best to simply be nearby. The archduke could not understand where this strange, unspoken feeling of confidence, like that time in the orphanage, had come from again. He simply felt a strong attraction. This feeling was so obvious that he knew that it was her he had to take with him. It was as if a clear understanding had matured in him, as if this decision had been made a long time ago, even before he himself realized it. My lord could not ignore the inner voice. He felt that this was his true duty, and nothing could now change this choice. And now, standing in front of this door, he again felt the same inexplicable feeling of confidence that she was inside. This was unusual for him, because he knew a lot about magic and its manifestations, but he had never encountered such signs of it. This energy subtly attracted him, intrigued him to the depths of his soul, and he felt that he had to take a step further and go inside. Opening the door abruptly, he found himself in a completely empty room, which seemed slightly gloomy and abandoned. Looking around, he looked at the bed and noticed that someone was sleeping there. After all, the Archduke could still feel her presence. But he didn't see the girl herself anywhere. It didn't escape his attention that someone had touched the sheet, which meant she was in this room. He felt a little uneasy as he imagined the girl spending that night alone in that cold and dusty room. He clearly understood that she had slept here, covered with a dirty sheet, but he did not know why she had come here. The Archduke knew very well that the night could bring unpredictable dangers, and the girl had to be under the supervision of servants. After thinking for a bit, he decided that he would deal with this assumption later, and now he would throw all his efforts into searching for her. With each passing second, he became more and more concerned for her safety, the bloodstains on the fabric leaving no doubt that she was injured. Having ordered all the servants to be summoned, he emphasized that all the adjoining rooms needed to be searched as quickly as possible. His voice sounded stern, but there was a sense of anxiety in it that he himself did not want to admit, but he understood that the servants could not be fooled. The servants dispersed throughout the estate, carefully examining every corner, every shadow, and the Archduke also quickly followed them. Deborah was about to go out, but she stopped to listen. A barely audible creak caught her attention, and she held her breath. She hoped that it was a girl and not some mouse, so she strained her ears. The sound was repeated, but this time more clearly. For the first second, she was even confused suddenly. From the shadow of the closet, the outline of a figure appeared, thin, graceful, and with a pale face. It was a young lady who had definitely also noticed her presence and stood slightly agitated for a split second at the door. But the next moment, Sienna gestured to the maid not to say anything, and then said that she had left the marks on purpose. And she added that it was better for them to speak in a whisper so as not to attract attention. Then Deborah asked why the lady was hiding in such a place. Sienna replied that her disappearance had already caused problems, and she thought things would get more complicated if the Archduke found her in person. Our heroine woke up late in the morning and immediately assessed the situation when she saw the unkempt state of the room. In the daylight, it was clear that there was dust everywhere, meaning that it hadn't been cleaned for a long time, and the air smelled of desolation. It seemed that this place had been forgotten by time, and every minute only confirmed that no one lived here or cared about order. She slowly sat on the edge of the bed and thought that if the owner of the house had intended to let her stay here this time too, then everything would have been prepared long ago. As she thought further, she came to the conclusion that the current situation was very different from what happened last time. However, she could not even imagine that she would actually be placed in the moon's cradle, and so she ran away to this room at night. But this was not the only difference with the past, because in this life the Archduke twice invited her to go with him to his estate. Each such proposal sounded like an opportunity to change one's destiny for the better, to hope for a promising future. And if he suddenly finds out that she disappeared on the very first day, then most likely he will be angry, and the Archduke's anger was always serious. At that moment, she was afraid that his disappointment could lead to unpredictable consequences, and she needed to act more carefully. She realized that she had caused trouble with her thoughtless actions, and in order to exist peacefully here, she needed to get along with the head maid. She also understood that she had to be very careful, to hide her plans and dreams until she understood how the situation was developing. However, Sienna didn't have time to think about what to do. She heard excited voices outside the door. One of them clearly belonged to the Archduke. His voice was quiet but worried, and she realized that if he discovered her, trouble would be inevitable. She couldn't let that happen, so she decided to just hide for now, and she carefully crept up to the closet, clenching her fists in excitement. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but her mind told her that the longer she remained unnoticed, the better her chances of staying out of danger. The Archduke sensed her presence, but even after hearing about it, our heroine remained as quiet as possible, huddled in the shadows, holding her breath. It was normal for her to pretend that she didn't exist. It was her superpower. She had to be invisible before. Our heroine asked the maid to take her out after some time, and then tell everyone that it was she who found her. Deborah was extremely surprised and asked if the young lady really wanted to help her, but the girl quietly replied that this was not so. And she thought to herself that it was not in her interests to turn the head maid against herself, especially on the very first day. Besides, she understood perfectly well that in such circumstances it was better to keep her intentions to herself for the time being. She decided that it was not worth attracting unnecessary attention for now, because she still had many questions that needed answers. And although Deborah did not understand the girl's true motives, she thought that this was a good offer and there was no point in her refusing. The headmaid did not regret her decision when she saw the faces of the master and the butler, who were happy to see them, especially the girl, and in her eyes there shone a calm mind, as if she had long known that everything was working out exactly as it should now. Meanwhile, Deborah reported that the young lady was hiding in the closet, and Roderick was surprised that he had been so close but had not been able to spot her. The maid continued her quick report, saying that the girl was slightly injured and apparently needed help. The Archduke agreed and said that they would begin with this and, holding out his hands, asked that the child be handed over to him. But our heroine was in no hurry to see her guardian. Much from the past was still alive in her memory, and she was not ready for change. She remembered the Archduke as a completely different person, so she pressed herself closer to the woman who, she thought, could protect her. My lord was a little confused, but Deborah asked him not to worry. She would do just fine and would handle it herself and would be very careful. Her voice was confident and calm, and she looked straight into his eyes, trying to show him that she was worthy of his trust. The owner of the house had no choice but to accept this decision. He didn't want the girl to feel uncomfortable. The doctor, having carefully examined the patient, concluded that the wound was not very serious, but the young lady was still seriously injured. And in a more friendly tone, he added that she probably had to endure this for a long time, but now the main thing is not to strain herself and let the wound heal. He smiled a warm smile, trying to reassure the girl that she was in good hands, and even offered her a piece of candy. Our heroine politely declined and thought that she was no longer a child, but no one around her knew it. Then she remembered that in her past life she had also received first aid, but this had happened solely at Lorraine's direction. Everything was so different from the past that for a second it seemed to her that this was not her life, but some completely different world. In the past, everything seemed more familiar and understandable, but now it was as if she had ended up in someone else's corner, where everyone behaved even differently. And this rather simple question from the Archduke, why she slept in an abandoned room, baffled her. She didn't know what to answer. Various thoughts flashed through her head. She understood that the answer should be simple, but for some reason the words could not be found. After thinking about it, she said that the room they had given her was too good, and in her sleep she couldn't even imagine that it was real. Her answer surprised the Archduke. His eyebrows rose slightly and a slight look of bewilderment flashed in his eyes. Not only did he not expect such sincere and, to some extent, naive honesty, the butler quietly said, "Look at this child." Sienna looked up at her guardian and thought that he had the same expression on his face that she had already seen at the orphanage. It was as if he was suffering pain inside, trying to hide his feelings, and she again wondered why he had put her in such a luxurious room. She couldn't answer this question for herself, but she didn't want to ask him either. It seemed easier to her for now to leave everything as it was. In the end, I decided to keep my suspicions to myself and just watch. Maybe over time she would decide whether it was worth knowing the truth at all. Now she only knew that she didn't want to get involved with these people, because as soon as Lorraine appeared, they wouldn't be so nice to her. Her heart beat a little faster at the thought of running into her sister, so she decided to keep her feelings in check. Our heroine also thought that no talent could bridge the gap between her and him. The abyss seemed too deep. And empty dialogues are just an illusion of hope that she can change something, and she did not want to harbor false expectations. After all, every time she hoped, it only became harder for her. It was better to accept reality as it is, and not hope for a miracle. Let her remain in the shadows, because this is the only way she can survive in this world, preserving her inner strength and life itself. However, she understood that she had behaved incorrectly, so she asked for forgiveness and promised that she would not cause any more problems. Roderick still wanted to know the reason for her actions, but stopped himself, thinking that he should not interrogate Sienna, realizing that she needed time. Inside, he felt a desire to understand what exactly led her to this act, but he understood that forcing her would only make the situation worse. So he nodded and said in a soft tone that it was not her fault, so she did not have to apologize to him. I decided to leave the question for later, believing that with time everything would become clearer, and now I would give her the opportunity to sort out her thoughts and feelings. For now, he simply decided to trust the circumstances and added that Luna's cradle was her room, she just had to know that. At that moment, Sienna thought that as soon as Lorraine showed up, he would ask her to vacate the room, so it would be better to explain everything right away. She decided to refuse, better to say it straight out than to fall into a trap again or risk disappointing him in the future. However, once Lorraine arrives, she will get another room anyway, and her sister will not be hostile towards her. If he politely gave in to her, and right now Sienna didn't want to worry about such things, because there was nothing wrong with staying for now, I decided that it was better to leave everything as is, not to provoke a conflict and not give rise to new questions. Let everything be calm and quiet. For now, she can figure everything out on her own, and the servant's room in Luna's cradle is familiar to her, so she can live there quietly. The archduke noticed that the girl wanted to say something, but for some reason changed her mind, so he asked her to tell him what the matter was. The young lady was silent, and he thought that she had behaved like a child at the orphanage, but from the moment she arrived at the estate, her behavior had changed. It probably takes her longer to get used to this new place and feel confident enough. He understood that change was not easy, and decided to give her space to decide when and how to share. And he even opened his mouth to tell her about it, but at that moment Deborah spoke up, reminding her that the young lady hadn't even had breakfast yet. Then she, looking sternly at the gentleman, added that she would prepare everything herself and bring breakfast to the girl's room. The headmaid understood that caring for the young lady would be an integral part of her duties from that day on. That's why some moments seemed strange to her, because even half asleep you can see how beautiful the cradle of the moon is. And Deborah could not answer herself why the girl sighed as if for some reason she was uncomfortable being there. Then she thought that soon the young lady would forget her past life in the orphanage and would enjoy becoming part of the Nacht family. These thoughts cheered her up a little, adding warmth to her heart, and with this attitude she entered the room, where she again did not find the girl. She felt unsure how she should react when Sienna disappeared from the chambers, and she didn't know where she went. Her eyelids twitched slightly from confused feelings. She didn't know how to react to this, whether to worry or hope that everything would work out. Was that young lady really back in that room on the 3rd floor? And Deborah was about to go check when the door creaked. She sighed and tensed a little, but realized that the main thing now was to remain calm and be prepared for any development of events. Containing her growing irritation, Deborah gently informed the young lady that the room was for maids. Sienna's innocent tone disarmed her, and she even believed her words that she didn't know about it. She just felt much calmer there. The headmaid's mood softened a little, and she explained that this room was not the place where she should be. Afterwards, she invited the girl to sit down and enjoy breakfast, and our heroine thought that now was not the time to be stubborn. And if she just continues to stay in the servants' room, sooner or later they will stop paying attention to it. Sienna felt such peace in her soul that she caught herself thinking that she was comfortable when there was no reason to worry. The breakfast looked quite appetizing, everything here promised a pleasant day, and she could easily allow herself to relax. For a moment it even seemed to her that everything would be fine, and that peace and comfort lay ahead, but for some reason she really wanted to sleep. Her drowsiness did not escape the attentive Deborah, so the maid suggested that she eat and go to bed quickly. After saying a quiet prayer, our heroine carefully picked up the cutlery and, with a slight smile, began her breakfast. As she ate, thoughts of the past faded into the background, giving way to a quiet feeling of calm and comfort. At that moment, it seemed to her as if everything past, conflicts and fears, were left behind, and now she was simply enjoying this morning. It was a small but important feeling, as if for the first time in a long time she could relax and just be here and now. Deborah kept her eyes on her, surprised to think that, as far as she knew, they didn't teach manners in orphanages. However, the young lady gave the impression that she was trained in etiquette, and this was evident in her every careful movement. The maid watched this with interest, deciding that perhaps the girl possessed hidden qualities that would be revealed over time. After satisfying her hunger a little, Sienna felt herself getting terribly sleepy and wondered if she had slept so much before. Or maybe it was just that children sleep a lot in general, she thought, or maybe it was just a natural need of the body. In any case, now she wanted to sleep a little, just close her eyes and rest. Her sleepy state was noticed by Deborah. She thought that the girl was simply unable to eat anymore, so she offered her some water and asked if she would like to finish. Our heroine was already so overcome with sleep that she could hardly hear the words, and did not resist when she was led to bed. Fatigue took over, and covering herself with a blanket, the girl felt a warm wave wash over her, and her thoughts began to blur into a fog. As soon as her head hit the pillow, she immediately fell into a peaceful sleep, and did not hear the wishes of pleasant dreams. However, having learned from bitter experience, Deborah was afraid to leave her unattended, so she ordered the maid to keep an eye on her. Sienna hoped that in this state she would be able to get some well-deserved rest, allowing herself to forget about all her worries. But the peaceful sleep quickly gave way to a nightmare. Her sister reminded her of herself again and asked if Sienna liked playing mistress. In a half-fainting state, the girl sat up and wondered if she would always have nightmares and Lorraine in this bed. Her mind was seething with anxiety and fatigue, and overcoming the strong desire to once again plunge into the silence of sleep, she quickly stood up. She walked carefully towards the door, hoping for a change of scenery and the strength to overcome the nightmares that haunted her. She felt calmer in that small servant's room. It was quiet and cozy, like a secluded refuge from all worries. The soft beating of her heart created a feeling of security, and the girl felt the tension in her soul ease a little. She sat on the edge of the bed, looking around timidly, and thought that this room, unfortunately, did not bring back the most pleasant memories. Even the walls here reminded her of the past, and those days she had lived through that, it seemed, would haunt her for many years to come. One day, our heroine accidentally overheard a conversation between two maids. They were discussing her, calling her that gloomy orphan. They said that she wrote letters to herself, sewed handkerchiefs, and generally behaved just like a real maid. Sienna froze in place when she heard that she at least knew her place and didn't try to seem like someone more important. And when Lady Lorraine becomes Archduchess, the little girl will be appointed her servant, and another asked if it was too much for an orphan. Every word was like a slap, wounding her pride and self-respect. Everything inside her clenched so tightly that it took her breath away. Then she felt the whole world around her disappear, leaving only this one moment full of crushing and hopelessness. But most of all, our heroine had memories associated with her sister, and this is not surprising, because they spent time together. True, when they grew up, Lorraine left her alone more and more often, meeting with friends, and upon returning she shared her impressions. She said that the tea party was very fun, and even jokingly complained that Sienna did not join them. One day, our heroine replied that although she didn't go with her sister, she was able to have a good rest at home, which she didn't get to do very often. In response, Lorraine laughed and said that everything was correct, because her sister was so quiet and shy, and if she went, everyone would be uncomfortable. Sienna felt how every offensive phrase reinforced her in the thought that she was a nobody to this family and had no name, like a shadow. But at the same time, deep down, it became clear to her that she could not allow these words of her sister to break her completely. Moreover, Lorraine, feeling that she had gone a little too far, immediately added cheerfully that she still enjoyed spending time with her little sister. And our heroine, who was in such dire need of simple expressions of love, quickly forgot all the hurtful barbs said by her sister. No matter what the rest of the Nacht family was like, she always had Lorraine, who allowed her to call her sister and let her sleep with her. For our heroine, she remained the only living being in this house who recognized even her insignificant efforts. Sienna always believed that it was only thanks to her sister's magic that she had not yet been thrown out of the estate in disgrace, although there was something strange. There were days when she wanted to leave her sister and run away somewhere far away, to leave behind all these shadows of the past, humiliation and cold looks. She often caught herself thinking that perhaps one day all this would end, and she would be able to disappear like a shadow and start a new life. And it didn't matter what place it was, if only she could leave. But she was so naive to believe that there was a way out somewhere. She imagined this quiet, secluded place where no one would call her worthless or question her value. But each time she realized more and more clearly that her dreams were just an illusion, and she would have to come to terms with her fate as an unnecessary sister. After all, even when Lorraine suggested sleeping together, in reality it meant that she would spend the night in this servant's quarters. Every night is like a test, a reminder that her place is not in the center of attention, but somewhere out there in the shadows, invisible, forgotten, unnecessary. Sienna knew that Lorraine would be arriving at the estate in about 6 months, and she was curious how her sister would react to the fact that she had been given Luna's cradle. But this desire quickly dissolved. She did not even want to imagine a future that was full of uncertainty and anxiety. Her thoughts that one day everything would change now seemed like just an empty dream. Days filled with loneliness lay ahead of her. And although our heroine went to bed with a heavy heart, the night was calm, so she woke up well rested. However, the fact that she was not sleeping in her own bed again did not please Deborah, and she sternly asked if she was really in that room again. Sienna opened her mouth to justify herself, but the maid asked the next question, asking what she had said about it being quieter here. She continued that in such a case one needs to spend more time in the moon's cradle to get used to it, and the young lady is not trying hard enough. Everyone in the estate knew that the archduke had been away for several days, fighting hordes of demons on the border. Exile is also absent. He returned to the military academy, and Michael, as always, disappears for days somewhere in the estate. Therefore, the girl did not quite understand why the maid was pestering her so much about this. Now there was no one to answer to for her behavior. Based on these facts, she decided to relax a little, but Deborah had a different opinion, and she clearly took her responsibilities seriously. Our heroine even thought that it seemed that Madame's maid was much more faithful to her master than she could have previously imagined. She was planning to stay in this house for about 6 months, so she didn't want to conflict with Deborah over every little thing. But the maid did not leave the young lady alone, and asked her if she was really going to sit there all day again and do nothing. When Sienna replied that she didn't behave that way at all, Deborah sarcastically asked if the girl was thinking of moving into that room again. And to the young lady's reply that it was comfortable there, she replied that with these words she was insulting the house, saying that she was more comfortable in a squalid little room. The girl glanced at the woman in surprise, but said nothing, because she could not explain her attachment to that place. After all, she had actually lived there for half of her previous life, and she took the maid's words as a personal insult. But she couldn't say it, so she listened to Deborah's moralizing speech about why the lady was always sighing. It's all because she's constantly in that dark room, and it's time to end it. It's time to get some fresh air. The maid ended her tirade by saying that the young lady would also explore the estate, and this was said in such a way that Sienna decided not to resist. She listened silently to the fact that Deborah was incredibly happy that she would be giving her charge a tour of the house. However, our heroine did not share this joy, because she already knew this house like the back of her hand, but could not say so. Meanwhile, the maid said that there was a simple exhibition hall on the 2nd floor, and suggested that we take a look there. Sienna again kept to herself her thoughts about how it didn't look simple, but it certainly looked like the richest house in the world. She knew very well that the Nacht family, which defended a huge territory, received a very decent tribute for it. Much falls into their hands, from simple grain to vast lands and the richest mines, so the estate's exhibition hall is too luxurious to be considered even remotely simple. Deborah said that the exhibition's theme changes quarterly and suggested that from now on, she tell us as much about it as possible. Suddenly, the head maid interrupted her majestic monologue because the youngest heir of the Nacht family was in the hall. He was a tall, self-confident young man. His gaze immediately attracted everyone's attention. The maid froze for a second, and her words froze on her lips. She quickly found herself and, bowing, greeted the young lord, but our heroine didn't know whether she should say hello too. After a moment's thought, Sienna decided that she wouldn't, because she knew very well that Michael couldn't stand weak people. The maid could not allow such rudeness, so she quietly asked the young lady to greet the young lord properly. Sienna slowly looked up. Michael's face was inscrutable, but in the cold gleam of his eyes there was a shadow of boredom and slight hostility. She suddenly caught herself thinking that he would definitely leave first, because all these ceremonies were alien to him and he was not interested in empty formalities. At that moment she felt better if Michael left quickly. It meant there would be no long glances, no unpleasant tests of character. She just needed to wait until he lost his temper and got angry, but he did the exact opposite, saying that there was no need to bother. Then he asked if they had come to the exhibition, and, having received confirmation from Deborah, he told her that she was free to go. He will show everything himself, and this phrase of his was so unexpected that all the tension in the room was instantly replaced by mild surprise. Sienna felt resistance rising inside her. She wanted to object, to express her dissatisfaction, but she didn't know how. Everything inside her screamed that this was wrong, but outwardly she tried to maintain calm, although her heart was pounding wildly in her chest. She sincerely hoped that Deborah would not agree, but the maid was delighted and said that he understood art better than she did. Michael's eyes reflected a calm confidence, as if he was saying that he knew what he was doing and didn't need anyone else's advice. This unexpected turn of events made her nervous, but the maid did not want to contradict the young master, and so she said that she would take her leave. Our heroine tried to retreat after Deborah, feeling how the desire to evaporate became almost irresistible. But he stopped her with his insistent question. Maybe she would say hello after all, and she had no choice but to greet him. The young lord looked at the girl appraisingly and said, if she wanted one piece of advice, she could not count on staying in this house for long. She didn't quite understand what he meant, but she had a feeling he was hinting at something more, at his own reasons or concerns. But instead of reacting, she thought that it was even better for her that his character had not changed. In this case, she knew how to behave with him. And when he asked her if she understood what he was talking about, she calmly replied that she had already thought about something similar. She decided that there was no point in pretending in front of Michael. She just needed to make it so that he ignored her this time too. At that moment, our heroine even remembered how he had contemptuously told her back then that she had already stopped taking work away from the maids. His words were imprinted in her memory that if she was so unassuming, maybe it would be better for her to get out of this house. From past experience, she knew what the young lord wanted to hear from her, so she asked him in a submissive tone not to worry. Then she added that an orphan like her did not deserve to be a child of the Nacht family, even an adopted one. And she continued that when the time comes, she will enter the military academy, but until then she asks, even if she catches your eye. But she managed to finish her speech. Michael, barely containing his irritation, asked how she could say such things so easily. There was a note of bewilderment in his voice. He couldn't believe that someone would so calmly dream of exchanging all this for an uncertain future. It sounded eloquent. His question was not just about words, but about the inner strength or the indifference she demonstrated. She felt his gaze on her and realized that his displeasure was much deeper than it seemed at first glance, and she was completely confused. Then she heard him say that they would talk about it later, and wondered if he was ill by any chance, since he had turned so purple. And she thought that in all cases she had nothing more to add, and if she had ruined his mood, he would simply turn around and leave. But he again failed to live up to her expectations, because he suddenly asked her to follow him without giving any reason. This proposal took her by surprise, she thought for a moment. She wanted to understand what exactly this strange young man wanted from her. A surprised expression escaped her, and Michael, stretching, replied that he had promised the head maid to show her everything. Sienna couldn't believe that he suddenly decided to keep his word. She mentally asked him to just up and go about his business. Sighing, she reluctantly and patiently followed him, not knowing to what secrets or trials his sudden desire was now leading her. She clarified that he didn't like it, to which he replied that he, however, couldn't just go back on his words. Sienna couldn't help but agree it would really look shameless if he were to break his promises and turn back. As if words meant nothing, he clearly adhered to some inner code, and despite his cold reserve. And even though it seemed incomprehensible and even a little scary to her, she realized that it was better to follow him now, because refusal was no longer an option. He told her that if you move from the edges to the center, you can trace the entire genealogy of their family through the portraits on the walls. When he said that this was where the most important thing came from, Sienna noted that he was enthusiastic about explaining, although he had never been the most tactful. She listened to him with half an ear, and even almost bumped into him a couple of times when she suddenly felt some inexplicable attraction. Looking in that direction, for the first second she even froze in surprise. In front of her was an object that attracted her gaze. It was a small, shimmering object that seemed to glow from within and attracted her gaze with its mysterious aura. At that moment she felt her heart squeeze a little harder, and a strange, inexplicable craving for this object awoke in her. She had a feeling of déjà vu when Michael pulled her out of her coma with his words that she did, however, have a rather keen eye. He wanted to satisfy her curiosity, so he slowly moved closer and quietly asked if she wanted to take a closer look. His voice was soft, but there was a slight hint of mystery in it. Then he said something that made her freeze, that it was the flame of Kesseros, one of the names. She repeated the name quietly, as if casting a spell, a slight tremor in her voice. Michael asked, "She knows that this is a sacred object, sealed in a box for many thousands of years. An ancient legacy that only the most worthy people can subjugate, and there are only 13 names in this world." Our heroine knew that the Nacht family had 4 of them, 2 of which belonged to the head of the family, the archduke. Accordingly, his eldest son also had another special one, which is passed on only to the most worthy heirs. The location of another was unknown to her. This information had always been a secret, hidden in the shadows of ancient legends and ancient agreements. The young lord, with a serious expression on his face, said that this special one had never submitted to a human in the entire history of mankind. Its power and antiquity were such that no mortal could master it completely, not even one of those who tried. He added that this is why the flame of Kesseros is considered one of the rarest and most powerful, capable of granting incredible power. This power inspired respect, and from the words of the young lord who possessed knowledge about it, it was clear that this secret had been carefully guarded for centuries. Our heroine was haunted by a feeling of déjà vu. She tensed up and remembered that Lorraine had once touched him somehow. After her sister stole Sienna's magic, she couldn't resist trying to touch Kesseros, and then disaster almost happened. Something in her movement caused an explosion of energy, powerful magic and Kesseros collided, and after that, Lorraine lost consciousness. And the name split into 2 parts, as if an ancient and incredible giant had suddenly shattered into pieces under the power of an unpredictable force. Lorraine, having been unconscious for 2 weeks, was on the verge of death, but she came to her senses spectacularly, as if awakening from a long sleep. Her return quickly became the stuff of legend, and she was hailed as a brilliant sorceress who was able to master the 1,000-year-old relic. Her name was now spoken with reverence and awe, and her story a reminder that even the most ancient mysteries could be overcome. But Kesseros himself disappeared from the duchy after this, as if he had dissolved into the fog or vanished into thin air. Its power left behind only a quiet echo or a mighty rustle, like the last drops of mistrust in a world that could not contain it. Suddenly, our heroine was pierced by a sharp sensation of piercing cold. All this happened because her powers were stolen. If she touched him now, something similar would happen. The magic could explode, and most likely the consequences would be catastrophic. But what if it's even worse? Maybe she simply won't be able to withstand it, and such a touch will become the last act of her life, ending her existence forever. She shuddered with fear of losing everything, but at the same time she wanted to understand the truth. Michael noticed her internal struggle, so he asked if she probably wanted to touch the relic, and Sienna, sharply pulling her hand away, apologized, and then said that she didn't dare. Then the young lord began to insist. He began to convince her that she could calmly touch it, and that nothing terrible would happen anyway. Reason told the girl that the risk was too great, so she held her breath, trying to contain the urge, and said that she would manage. She thought to herself that for now, right now, she needed to focus on another plan and not expose herself to unnecessary danger. Considering her actions to be a sign of weakness, the young lord said with a slight disappointment, "Well, if she doesn't want to, then it's her choice." He paused for a moment and, changing his intonation, which clearly conveyed a note of disappointment, suggested continuing the tour. Reluctantly following him, she thought that even the bravest are sometimes forced to make a choice on which their entire fate depends. Sienna could barely hide her desire to sleep when he told her that this work bore the signature of a famous master of that time. Michael turned around abruptly and caught his companion yawning and asked, slightly irritated, what she was doing while he was talking. She quickly and a little embarrassedly apologized. She felt awkward herself, but she couldn't help the overwhelming desire to sleep. His face hardened slightly, and a slight irritated note came into his voice, as if he was tired of her inattention. He tried to hide his disappointment, but he did a poor job of saying that he was trying so hard to explain, but she was bored. He made a small gesture with his hand, as if trying to hide the fact that his patience was at its limit, and then barked that, "Who cares, he won't do it anymore." Our heroine looked after him and thought that perhaps she should have stopped him so as not to make the situation worse. She felt a slight twinge of guilt in her chest. She could have been softer, shown a little more understanding. But the next moment she decided that she would not do this. They were not close enough to do this, and at that moment Deborah entered. Not seeing the young lord, she asked where he was, and her voice sounded a little anxious. She didn't want the children to quarrel. The young lady calmly replied that he had left first, as if it were the most ordinary thing that should not be paid attention to. The maid asked if Sienna must be upset, but she did not answer anything, because on the contrary, she was glad to be rid of Michael. The girl hoped that they would leave her alone for today, but it was not to be. Deborah said that it was even better this way, because it was time for the girl to get ready. When Sienna asked why, she replied that some time ago they had received a telegram stating that the archduke was returning. The battle ended successfully, and despite the bad weather, he hurries to the estate, where after a long absence there will be a family dinner. Deborah added that Lord Asriel would also be taking part, and our heroine let out a quiet, involuntary "damn." Looking reproachfully at her charge, the maid asked what she had just said, to which she, with an innocent look, replied, "What?" Deciding that this sweet child was unlikely to know such words, the maid smiled softly and said that she had most likely just imagined it. She quickly changed the subject so as not to get stuck on unnecessary explanations, reminding them that they already needed to hurry because time was running out. Sienna didn't want to attend the dinner, saying she was still clumsy with etiquette and would like to be alone in her room until she learned. However, the maid had clear instructions on this matter, so she said in an adamant tone that this was out of the question. That this was a dinner that the master had personally ordered her to prepare, and Lord Asriel had received permission to leave to attend. After wondering why she had to go that far, our heroine began to realize that she couldn't seem to find a reason to avoid this meal. And Deborah continued that, besides, something very good was waiting for the young lady, but she could not tell her now, so as not to spoil the surprise. Realizing she had no other choice, the girl followed the head maid, noting to herself that the nights here were still unusual. She always had a strange feeling when she was in these corridors in the evenings, as if even the walls here kept secrets. Every shadow seemed filled with something mysterious, as if there was something much more going on here than met the eye. When our heroine first arrived at Castle Nacht, she was frightened by the frightening atmosphere and even cried in her sleep. She walked forward, trying to ignore this feeling, but inside, she still had the thought that the night here kept its secrets. The doors to the dining room swung open, and the butler, with a slight bow, announced that the young lady Sienna had arrived. The archduke, who was sitting at the table, looked up and said with relief that she had finally arrived and invited them to sit down. Sienna immediately noticed those present. Everyone was dressed in very formal and ostentatiously rich clothes. The outfits were so expensive, downright incredibly luxurious, embroidered with precious stones and patterned collars. While she only had the most modest clothes from the shelter, she still tried to choose the best of what she had. She wondered if they had done it on purpose to humiliate her, but even if they hadn't, she felt uncomfortable. She thought that even if she didn't look at them, she still knew better than anyone that her presence here remained foreign. No matter how much she tried to be calm, inside she still felt like a guest who wasn't entirely welcome. One thing was clear to her: even if she tried to appear strong, she still knew her true role as an outsider in a world of wealth and power. Her attention was drawn to a pomegranate neatly placed on the dining table, and she was surprised, as this fruit is not usually served. But given the family's status and the fact that the pomegranate is part of the symbolism of the Nacht coat of arms, as it is often associated with wealth, this was logical. This fruit clearly had a special meaning, and she suspected that it was not just a dessert, but a symbol embedded in the traditions of this family. While she was pondering this, the archduke gave the signal that they could begin, and everyone, following his example, began to help themselves to food. Outside the window, the storm was raging, the rain was pouring down, lightning was flashing brightly in the sky, and the clouds seemed dark and menacing. There was silence inside the hall, broken only by the low rumble of the thunderstorm. A certain tension could be felt in this raging element. Lord Asriel broke the silence, complaining about the weather and telling his father that, fortunately, the extermination on the border had ended early. The owner of the house told him that it was true, and the devilish creatures became more ferocious when the weather got worse like this. Our heroine thought that of the 4 people with whom she absolutely did not want to stay in the same room, she had dinner with 3 of them. She even thought with a slight hope that, thanks to this experience, she would not get indigestion because of this company. Smiling slightly, she tried to focus on the upcoming evening and hoped that this dinner would pass without incident. But, as luck would have it, she had no appetite, and noticing this, Asiel, who was sitting next to her, quietly asked if she did not like the food. To this, Sienna evasively replied that she was still eating, trying to hide her thoughts, but he noticed that she had not even touched the meat. Then she realized with bitterness that he was watching her for a reason. There was always a hint of insight in his gaze. He seemed to be a man who saw much more than his words and gestures revealed, and his insight made him dangerous. Asiel remained the man who watched everyone around him, as if he were playing his own game, carefully analyzing every action. At that moment she realized that she had to be especially careful, because any step she took could be noticed, and she timidly apologized. He noticed her confusion and, to ease the tension, said that he had not meant anything bad at all and had not meant to blame her at all. His voice was calm and balanced, as if he understood her hesitation and was trying to make her understand that trust was most important. The Archduke intervened and said that she should not apologize for not liking the food if she didn't like it. She didn't have to eat it. But she had a completely different feeling to her. It sounded as if he was telling her to eat at least something. He called the butler and asked her if the lady would like to have other food served to her, and she replied that everything should remain as it was. Sienna thought that behind all their games and gestures, there was still a lot that was not said, and she would have to be very careful. The Archduke, watching her, thought that he had been hasty and should not have forced her to dine with everyone. He noticed a slight tension in her eyes. He squinted, thinking that sometimes even the most clever strategists made mistakes in their calculations, and that was exactly what had happened now. Thinking about whether to continue insisting, I decided to leave everything as is and asked her, if she got hungry later, to tell the maid about it. He had a very important ceremony planned for dinner tonight, and he didn't want to put it off until next time. He asked to bring him the grenades and looked at them silently for a while, as if he was hesitating to begin, his gaze focused. It was as if he was peering into each grain, trying to catch something hidden behind their bright appearance. And then, with great care, he began to break them apart. All his actions were leisurely but precise and accurate. At that moment, the atmosphere in the room was filled with a special silence and meaning that was understood only by a select few. Our heroine didn't consider herself one of them, so she watched everything silently, trying to guess what all these ceremonies with the pomegranate were about. Imagine her surprise when the Archduke shared his garnet with her. She could not understand what it meant. She froze, trying to grasp the meaning of this gesture. Embarrassment and curiosity overcame her, and she waited for at least some kind of clue. However, I only heard the butler's congratulations, but after a short silence he nevertheless began to explain what was happening. He said that this happens when a new member is accepted into the family. The latter eats a pomegranate served personally by the Archduke. This is the custom here, and the one who eats it will be blessed as many times as there are seeds in the fruit. Sienna wondered if that was what Deborah had meant when she said it was a surprise, but it looked more like bloody flesh than a garnet. It was as if a pack of wolves were tearing apart the prey that the hunter was tracking, and she compared it to some kind of barbaric ritual. Looking at the Archduke, Sienna thought that she had never heard or experienced anything like this when she was with her sister Lorraine. Her gaze slid over the others present, and she noticed that their faces remained calm and focused. It was as if everyone knew and observed some important secret, but she felt that it was not for her, that she was not ready for such rituals. She hoped that it would all end quickly, that it was something distant and alien, and that she would not have to become part of this mysterious ritual. But judging by the way everyone was calmly eating pomegranates, it was clear that the choice had already been made, and she would have to go through with it, even if she didn't want to. Feeling an internal resistance, she thought about becoming part of something so alien that it would separate her from those around her. A shiver ran down her spine, as if she had done something she shouldn't have, and every cell in her body seemed to be screaming about it. She was a stranger in this world of rituals, and she still had to figure out whether she should give in or try to get out of this incredible game. Then she suddenly felt small and vulnerable, as if in someone else's dream, where everything was alien and dangerous to her, and she wanted to get out of this situation. The Archduke solemnly declared that Sienna was now considered their daughter and that the dead of night and the entire retinue of this house would protect her. His voice sounded like a sentence, filled with power and promise, as if invisible chains were firmly binding her to this new world. At that moment, a mixture of anxiety and surprise crept into her heart. She did not want to accept someone else's role, which was not intended for her. Suddenly, she felt a power and responsibility that she could no longer ignore, and she asked what she should do, because she was just an orphan. Then, embarrassed but still firmly, she continued that no matter what they were counting on, she would not be able to justify the trust placed in her. Michael asked why she was saying that, but my lord stopped him and said that it was none of his business, adding that these were not the words of a small child. He suggested that someone had inadvertently offended Sienna and that someone within these walls had really allowed themselves to speak carelessly. And turning to Deborah, he asked what she thought about this, to which she replied that she knew nothing of the sort. She could swear she had said nothing of the sort, but while the gentleman was absent, she might have made a mistake. Her voice sounded a little stunned, as if she herself was not entirely sure of her words, and her eyes showed confusion and slight excitement. The Archduke looked at her long and darkly, so she added that now that Sienna had eaten the pomegranate, no one would dare show disrespect. The butler supported her, saying that he would personally oversee this, and besides, it was immediately obvious that the young lady was smarter than her peers. And then he added that very soon everyone would begin to admire the wisdom and insight of his lordship and begin to imitate him. Deborah picked up and said that in that case, why shouldn't the gentleman find a suitable mentor for the young lady? Our heroine wondered if it was too early to hire a teacher in her past life. She was only allowed to teach after 3 months. To her surprise, Asil supported this idea and said that everything was correct. He saw no point in delaying the issue of her training. Even Michael put in his 2 cents, suggesting that if she wanted, she could take a few lessons from him first. Then Roderick concluded that in that case they would find a mentor, but he thought that there was still much to discuss. He proposed setting a budget for Sienna's education, and she looked at the young lord and couldn't understand that he was kicking her out of the house. While she was trying to comprehend what was happening, my lord turned to her and said that she had now officially become a member of the family. Our heroine stared at him wide-eyed as he said he didn't know what nonsense she might have heard, but it was better to just forget about it. Looking down, she wondered how she could not keep it in her heart and forget, how she could throw out of her head everything that happened here. Their images from her past life appeared before her mind's eye. They suggested that she return to the shelter because nothing would come of her. They said she had no abilities. She remembered that in this family she never got what she needed. How can she forget this? Even if she listens to the advice and throws the memories out of her head, will her broken heart be able to? These words seemed to echo how much pain she had experienced, how many times she had felt rejected and forgotten. Even now, everything seemed so dark and unattainable, as if familiar hopes were dying, leaving only cold and emptiness in the soul. The Archduke began to get very worried seeing how Sienna was suffocating, how she was trying to get up, but her strength was leaving her, but he did not know whether to intervene. At the thought of what she had gone through, her heart sank. She could not continue to worry. She felt like she could not breathe. Anxiety gripped her, as if ice inside was turning to fire, and her breathing became increasingly difficult, and everything began to swim before her eyes. She desperately tried to stay on her feet, closed her eyes from severe pain and panic, and tried to grab the edge of the table. Then she grabbed the tablecloth to keep from falling, but everything felt like it was covered in ice. Her hands were slipping, and her body was slowly leaning forward. At that moment, everything around her seemed to be immersed in fog, and she felt how everything was losing its meaning, as if drowning in this abyss of despair. Our heroine realized that she was shaking all over, trying to maintain her balance, but her strength was leaving her, and she felt herself slipping. Dark silhouettes flickered before her eyes, and it seemed to her that she had completely lost control, that her consciousness was about to plunge into darkness. The remnants of her mind screamed at her not to give up, but a wave of weakness washed over her completely, and everything around her lost its clarity. Only the Archduke's voice kept her somewhere on the edge of reality. She had difficulty understanding that he was asking her to be patient and be smart. After calling the doctor, he continued to talk to her, and his confidence gave her strength. She felt her heart beat a little faster. He asked if she could go and offered his help. In those seconds, she wanted to forget the past and give herself another chance. She so wanted to bury her face in his broad chest and forget all the past grievances and hardships as if they had never happened. But this was only a momentary weakness that she allowed herself. In reality, she was terribly afraid to count on this family. She wanted to say that she should be left alone, that she should not be bothered, that she should not have to experience the same worries and fears anymore. Sienna mentally begged them not to fuss over her as if she was truly important to them, because their strange kindness was confusing her. Deep down, she wanted to believe that this concern was sincere, that they wanted to help her, but at the same time she was drawn to resistance. She had mixed feelings, a thirst for faith and hope, and a desire to hide and deceive herself that everything was still in her hands. The thought entered her head that instead of showing sympathy for her, she wouldn't mind if they grabbed her by the throat. Then at least she could feel that it was all over, that this was all a game, this was a lie, this was a constant struggle for survival. For her, this house was terrible, and she did not know what she had done that she had to suffer so unbearably day after day. She couldn't find an answer to her question, why should she go through the same circles of hell? Would it never end? In her past life, death was her only option, and she had no particular illusions that this time things could turn out differently. Her attempt to escape from this cold, hopeless circle seemed futile, as if her whole existence were a tangled knot. Somewhere in the distance, a quiet voice could be heard, saying that she probably fainted because she was very worried. This, in his opinion, was quite natural for children of her age, but another voice interrupted these thoughts, coolly and skeptically. He said it was nonsense and condemned such speculation, adding that neither he nor his sons had ever encountered anything like it. There was a confidence and cold rationality in his voice as he asked the doctor if the doctor had not examined the young lady before. The doctor began to justify himself, saying that the lady was seriously exhausted and that it was quite possible that she had eaten too much fatty food. Asil, who had been closely observing what was happening, intervened in their conversation and briefly shared his comments. He said that Sienna ate almost nothing at the table and barely touched fatty and meaty food at all, so this was unlikely to be the reason. To which the doctor replied that it was important to take into account the fact that the girl was in such a stressful situation for the first time, and her body was already weak. Altogether, everything led to such consequences. Then Michael spoke up that the doctor was hinting that this incident was provoked, and the girl, who was in poor health and mentally unprepared, was forced to attend the dinner, but he was not allowed to finish. The butler decided to intervene and said that the young lady would come to her senses tomorrow, but for now it would be better to give her the opportunity to rest in silence. He looked meaningfully at the gentleman and then, turning to the doctor, assured him that they would sincerely take care of the patient. His gaze was so penetrating, as if he understood more than he was saying, and this added special weight to his words. And the tone was confident, like a promise that carried with it the promise of hope and support, despite the troubling circumstances. Our heroine was in another dimension at that moment. Her memories tormented her even when her brain tried to rest. The guilt continued to whisper, ominously asking how she dared, the parasite, how such a small fry dared steal magic from Lorraine. Years passed. She was already 18, but the feeling of guilt kept her tense, preventing her from plunging into peace every night. Due to the theft of Lorraine's magical powers and the general deception, her life has become a constant struggle with her own thoughts and fears. There was a shadow inside her that kept her from forgetting the past, like a dark reminder that she herself had caused this whole nightmare. She wanted to wash away this guilt at any cost, and hoped that the hard work of the maids would help get rid of the painful memories. But it was all useless. The feeling of constant heaviness in her soul did not go away. It seemed to her that this mark on her heart was pressing harder. Every breath she took reminded her that she had done something unforgivable, for the magic she had stolen had essentially become a brand. This feeling constantly pressed on her heart like an insurmountable stone, preventing her from breathing freely. Even just crying became a luxury for her because tears meant weakness, and weakness could turn into an even bigger problem. She continued to endure, suppressing herself, hoping that with time it would all somehow work out and the burden on her heart would become a little less. Her sister herself once gave her advice. She could not afford to be lazy, and she hurried to finish making the amulet. Because it was the best she could do, Lorraine told her that day that cleaning was a job anyone could do. And then she added that, in her opinion, this was still not enough to justify the mercy that the Nacht family had shown her. Smiling innocently, she suddenly asked if she shouldn't try harder to truly earn their gratitude. However, Sienna did not know what else she could offer, and then her sister, noticing her confusion, suggested that she try making an amulet. She also emphasized that creating an amulet would help her express genuine care, dedication, and gratitude for everything she had been given. Sienna liked the idea. She thought that maybe this would be a chance to make amends a little and bring something good into her life. She decided to put her whole soul and a piece of her talent into this process, hoping that at least in this way she could get closer to redemption. Amulets were considered an essential attribute of sorcerers, and for them, the creation of such a talisman was not just a tradition or ritual. Sorcerers draw their power from chaos, the unstable, unbridled energy that flows through every corner of the magical world. It was this connection with chaos that made them powerful, capable of performing miracles, but at the same time vulnerable to all sorts of troubles. Sometimes they dug their own graves, some even lost control of their powers and turned into unimaginable monsters. Danger was a part of their lives. Every next experiment could be their last. They risked becoming monsters at any moment. So amulets were an important item to protect them, but she didn't know if she could create one with her meager power. Lorraine continued to insist, convincing her sister that this amulet was her chance to show the Noct family her devotion and gratitude. She assured that even a small one, created with sincere hope and warmth, could become the guarantee of her future if Sienna put her whole heart into it. Sienna listened, sighing heavily. She understood that this was an important step to show her devotion, to prove that she was really trying. But at the same time, she was afraid that her efforts would be in vain, and the amulet would turn out to be too weak or incorrect. Nevertheless, she decided to give it a try. Even if the result did not meet expectations, she knew that at least she did her best. However, she had too little information about protective amulets, and therefore our heroine did not even know if she was doing everything right. She had no choice but to use trial and error, and with her strength, she could only make a low-level amulet. And yet she spent several days making it, sincerely hoping in her heart that it would be at least a little useful. One of the maids conveyed to her Aziel's request that she clean his room, and Sienna meekly agreed. She had already given him the amulet she had made, and hoped that at least a little magic inside it would help him, support him in difficult times. Perhaps this small gesture would be the beginning of her own path to redemption, but for now she needed to focus on cleaning. Inhale, exhale. Her inner mood awakened again. Even if it was boring, even if it was difficult, she would do everything as it should be. It was a small investment in her own future, and an attempt to become a little better than yesterday. She took a mop and began to tidy up the room. Against the backdrop of monotonous movements, thoughts again returned to the amulet and the hope that at least a little magic could help Aziel. And what was her disappointment when she found her amulet carelessly thrown on the floor, covered with dust and random things. At that moment, she realized that all her efforts were in vain, that she could not even deserve the slightest care or respect. Her hands began to tremble and a wave of despair rose up inside her. All her hope that she could change anything was in vain. Deep down, she felt that all her efforts were just a feeble attempt to be useful, while she was being ignored and unappreciated. This realization was followed by bitterness, because her efforts were pointless, that she was simply dragging the burden of her own hopelessness on herself. It seemed to her that even the air around her had become heavier, as if all the magic that could have supported her strength was melting away in this abandoned corner. At that moment, it became clear to her that no amulet or effort would help if there was neither faith nor strength within her. Tears came to my eyes, and I thought how one day I would have to gather my courage again and understand that only I myself could change my destiny. The maid, who looked into the room and learned that Sienna had not yet finished cleaning, sighed quietly and said that she was expected in the warehouse later. Sienna nodded, smiling shyly and pretending everything was fine, although her heart was still unsettled with disappointment. But she knew she had to finish the task to avoid raising unnecessary questions and making her already precarious situation worse. The remnants of disappointment still filled her heart, but at that moment she realized that she still had to pull herself together and keep working. At that moment, Lord Michael appeared, who somewhat contemptuously threw at her that it was good that she was at least doing something. She politely replied that she was doing everything she could, trying to keep her voice calm despite her inner irritation. His gaze was cold and a little contemptuous as he told her with a slight hint of mockery that, in fact, no one had asked her about this. Michael continued with obvious disdain that she still knew her mediocrity and even tried to take the work away from the maids. So why didn't she just get out of here? She felt anger and humiliation boiling inside her, but she held back. Instead, she nodded quietly, gathering her strength, and replied softly but firmly that she would try not to be an eyesore to him anymore. There were mocking sparks in his gaze as he looked sarcastically at our heroine and said, "No, he knows that she won't leave on her own," and he added that otherwise she wouldn't be hanging around Azil, dreaming of the impossible. She felt his words take her breath away. Tears came to my eyes when I thought that this was just some kind of misunderstanding, although no, it wasn't even a misunderstanding. He was absolutely right when he said that she was dreaming of the impossible, and it became clear to her that this dream would not help her change her destiny. But even knowing this, she knew she was still trying to do something to make her existence a little more meaningful. She stood there listening to his words and realized that she would have to learn to live with this desire to believe and with the feeling that it was an illusion. That even this was too much for her, and after thinking about it she apologized, but even then Michael did not believe that she was truly sorry. At that moment, Sienna woke up. With a surge of fear and heaviness in her chest, she opened her eyes and realized with relief that everything was just a dream. She lay in her bed and thought that the dream had been terrible, long and vivid, leaving behind a feeling of hopelessness and melancholy. Sienna tried to calm down, realizing that it was just a nightmare. But there was a feeling that even though she had woken up, the fear and anxiety remained. She quickly ran her hand over her damp skin, trying to control the trembling, and decided that she would no longer allow these dreams to have power over her. Looking around, the girl realized that she was again in Luna's cradle, in a bed that reminded her of Lorraine. She felt her heart clench with regret. This bed, despite its beauty, would never be comfortable for her. The cradle of the moon seemed to remind Sienna that she would always feel a certain detachment and coldness in this place. For her, a small, vulnerable girl, this bed will never be truly comfortable, or even a little bit comfortable. She wanted to get rid of the shadows of the past, of those memories that continued to pull her back, holding her captive in illusions and fear. The next morning dawned, and the estate was silent, broken only by the gentle rustle of the awakening wind and the singing of birds. The sun's light softly filtered through the curtains. The young lord knocked to attract attention and asked if anyone could explain it to him. He was extremely curious to know why Sienna was in this room. His gaze slid along the walls, hoping to find a clue. Deborah replied that the lady had a high temperature and had come here unconscious, but he felt that this was not the whole truth. The young lord felt that he needed to solve this riddle in order to understand the true reasons for Sienna's appearance in the servants' room. He attacked the maid, asking if the girl had left her warm bed and come here herself, and if they thought he would believe this nonsense. Asked him to explain, "The head maid is just pretending to take care of the young lady when his father is around. Isn't that right?" Deborah was outraged by the way the question was put. She replied, "How could she? She clearly had a hard time tolerating baseless accusations." Then Sienna intervened and asked Michael to stop, because everything was exactly as the maid said. She came here herself. Sienna explained that she had come here because she was feeling unwell and didn't want any secrets or misunderstandings. However, the young lord was not convinced by her words, and he asked incredulously if she wanted him to believe such an explanation. She was probably just covering for Madame, and our heroine, thinking that this reminded her of kindergarten, replied that it was nothing of the sort. Then, in a tired voice, she added that she was not kind enough to protect a person who would treat her badly. But Michael was not convinced by these words, and he demanded to know why she ended up in the servants' room. Our heroine couldn't understand why he was interested in this at all before. He had considered this kind of treatment of her to be normal. Memories of the past filled her with a vague bewilderment, then everything seemed familiar, and their roles were clearly defined. And it would be good for both of them to think practically so that such situations do not happen in the future. She was confused in her thoughts, but she realized that something incomprehensible was happening between them, something that went beyond the scope of their previous relationship. At this moment, the only thing that was clear to her was that the ending in which she had nothing was quite pathetic. She calculated in her mind that if she continued to calmly accept their kindness, then falling into the abyss would be much more painful. Michael spoke again and said that she had been given such a nice room, but she interrupted him, saying that it was too nice for her. This room reminded her of the shelter she had lived in before, a cozy place where it seemed she could hide from all troubles. So, unconsciously, she began to associate this space with the safety and peace that she lacked in her life. The young lord was indignant and said that she was no longer a child from an orphanage, she was now an officially recognized child of the Nacht family. Then he asked if she had forgotten that she had even received a pomegranate from the head of the house, but she, of course, remembered that terrible ritual very well. In a didactic tone, Michael continued that apparently she was not aware and did not quite understand, but not everyone gets a grenade. Afterwards, he himself became confused because the explanation was too complicated, and Deborah came to the rescue, saying that the ladies are perceived as a member of the family. He said it was all true, something like that, and Sienna thought that then she would have wanted to avoid it even more. And if this had been possible in principle under those circumstances, she would have spat out that ill-fated pomegranate without a second thought. Michael at this point said that the incident was rare, as if trying to ease the tension and emphasize how rare it was. And in response, she only quietly thanked him, which puzzled him. There was something strange, a little tired determination in her gaze. He looked at her in slight bewilderment and waited. Maybe she would continue, and then he would understand what she was thanking him for now. There was a tense pause in the room, and to somehow defuse the atmosphere, Deborah said that the lady would gradually get used to all this. She added gently that she needed to give things time to settle down, and that things would become clearer with time. The maid hoped that these words would comfort the young lord a little, and he thought if he made a friendly expression on his face while saying this, perhaps his words would have sounded a little different. He imagined Lady Sienna clapping her hands joyfully or smiling in response. Deborah spoke again and turned to him, saying that the lady needed to change and rest so he could not leave them. After asking again about changing clothes, Michael belatedly realized that Sienna was indeed still in her nightgown. When he heard that she was sleeping in a squalid servant's room during her illness, he immediately came running here. The next thought made him blush, because he was a gentleman, but to think that he had burst into a lady's room and seen her in negligee. His heart fluttered with embarrassment, and he immediately wanted to disappear to avoid awkwardness and possible misunderstandings. Having apologized for such an indecent act, he decided that it was better to leave, and struggling with feelings of shame and confusion, he quickly retreated. The doctor stood up and said that since her body was fine, he would also leave her, and before leaving, he wished her a good rest. Sienna looked at the doctor and thought that she couldn't remember this. He was probably new and had recently appeared at the estate. In her past life, the family doctor pretended she didn't exist, and apparently wouldn't have treated the orphan without the archduke's personal order. Judging by his behavior, she remained more of a problem than a person who could be truly cared for. This indifference seemed to speak of many forgotten or forever lost human connections, and she frowned again. Deborah, noticing this, thought that the previous doctor had been fired because he had been negligent in Sienna's health and rumors had spread. There was talk among the servants that they should not show disrespect to the young lady, but for her it was even better that way. They became more disciplined, and she said out loud that the lady needed at least a light snack before her next dose of medication. She prepared a delicate soup for her charge, which she ate in the blink of an eye, as if hunger and fatigue had merged into one. This was an expression of gratitude for the care, and the maid, touched, said, "Could it really be that the lady finally felt her sincerity?" Then she asked to eat dessert as well since she had slept for 2 days, so she mashed an apple to make the girl feel better. At that moment, Sienna thought that Madame was treating her like that and praising her just for eating, and she felt awkward about such an attitude. She tried to understand whether she could accept this goodwill, which seemed too alien and distant to her to trust. The maid kept saying that it was cool and sweet, and although Sienna was already full, she gave in to these persuasions and continued eating. It was going through her head that she was not used to this kind of treatment, to the attention and tenderness that seemed unfamiliar to her. Everything around her reminded her of the past, when she was alone, without protection and warmth, and every manifestation of care was perceived with caution. Our heroine tried to understand whether these feelings were worth trusting, or whether all this was just temporary bliss in a series of severe trials. Noting the progress, Deborah asked if the lady was full, and if it was time for them to get ready, explaining that they had one more important thing to do today. As it turned out later, the Archduke personally called the tailor, and this was not just a wardrobe update, it was important for him to emphasize his status. The tailor, having received the invitation, arrived immediately. The whole day of painstaking work, sewing, fittings, and adjustments awaited them. There was a mixture of tension and anticipation in the air as everything was prepared to make the right impression, and to confirm her new status in the eyes of others, so that in any case she had no choice, and no one would listen to her excuses. Our heroine thought sadly that if she could fit into this family, then they would start to notice her, and many tiresome events would occur. She tried to explain to herself why everything was happening this way, because she thought that the archduke would be angry with her when she ruined that dinner. I couldn't understand why he hated her so much in the past, because it wasn't only because of her lack of magical talent. There was some other reason, hidden behind the mask of coldness and disdain, deeper than just disappointment or discontent. Meanwhile, the tailor was chattering that she had already heard about the beauty of Lady Sienna, that the girl had beautiful green eyes and shiny hair. And she has such white skin, so light and bright clothes would suit her, and the maid added that dark colors would also suit her. The room was filled with an atmosphere of creativity and anticipation, as there was much work ahead to create the perfect look for the upcoming events. The woman found the young lady's calm behavior strange, since children are usually delighted when they hear that they are being praised. She noticed that the girl had such an indifferent expression on her face, but immediately forced herself to watch her thoughts and words. "You have to be careful when you're in such a noble house," she reminded herself. "Every word and action could have meaning." Sienna glanced at her reflection and thought that she was too thin and unattractive, her face pale as chalk. And those huge green eyes framed by dull brown hair, plus the worn gray clothes, all this made up her image. All this, together with her awkward gait, gave her away as a child from an orphanage did any doubt even arise in their thoughts. She understood that her appearance was only part of who she was, but she also felt that it was difficult for her to live up to other people's expectations. I thought that this place really suited Lorraine, but all she did was try to imitate her older sister. There had been a lot of strange things happening around her lately, and every morning seemed more unusual and unpredictable. But if she still doesn't want to attract attention to herself, then she needs to return to her insignificant life, as before. She wanted to return to that quiet, unnoticed life, and leave all these strange events and thoughts behind as if they had never happened. A messenger appeared. He apologized for the intrusion and drew all eyes to himself, or rather, not to himself, but to what was in his hands. The bouquet was rich in color, with vibrant roses and delicate fragrances that instantly captured the attention of those around. He was known in this house as a man who always brought news, but now everyone was focused on the extraordinary beauty of the flowers. The messenger, noticing the interested glances, smiled slightly and respectfully said that this was for Lady Sienna, conveyed with respect. The unexpected gift raised even more questions about what event or feelings lay behind this gesture, and how it would all fit into her life. The bouquet was so huge that our young lady was swept to the side and barely managed to keep from losing her balance. Deborah quickly came to her aid, and among the bright petals she noticed an almost invisible note, carefully laid out inside. The maid leaned a little closer and read aloud, "Get well soon," and the ornate signature, "Azil." Smiling, she stated that the Lord was very worried about the young lady, but Sienna thought this was more than just a simple display of politeness. The maids, a little envious, commented that it was so romantic, and each flower must have cost a whole gold coin. Unconsciously, our heroine calculated that there were about 50 flowers here, which meant at least 50 gold coins. And she thought that it would be better if I gave it to her in money. She would need it to get to the military academy, because the journey was long and expensive. The value of the flowers was declining with each passing minute. Despite the beauty of the bouquet, it seemed to her that the gesture was more than just a display of politeness. Could it really have been that same Asil who gave them to her? She couldn't believe it. The act from a man she considered cold seemed so incredible. The thought occurred to her that maybe this was why Michael had misunderstood her and said that otherwise she wouldn't have been hanging around Asil. She wondered if he really thought she wanted to marry his older brother, even though she had always thought he was a simple-minded boy. Where did such thoughts come from? After all, it can't be that Lorraine tried here, in which case everything would have been different. She knew that there could never be anything serious between them. The thought of a special relationship seemed incredible to her. Although everything that concerned her older sister was possible, take the case when she herself had previously fallen for the trick of transferring mana. So why be surprised if she wasn't the only one who fell for Lorraine's manipulations? And if she could deceive her once, she could deceive her twice. Inside, everything was seething with anxiety. She understood that it was dangerous to linger here, because every moment could become another trap. Or perhaps it was Lorraine's clever move. The thought was like a poisonous venom entering her head, making her feel a little weaker. Sienna thought that she needed to get out of here quickly before everyone was fooled like they had been back then, and she risked finding herself in a more difficult situation. My heart was beating faster, but my eyes were filled with determination. I had to keep my eyes open, because in this game, every move could be my last. She asked him to convey her gratitude to the Lord, and then added that there were too many flowers for her alone, so she wanted to share. She had the thought that if she accepted this bouquet, Michael might misunderstand her again. She even imagined what he would say. Something like she received flowers from her older brother, and she was probably already imagining all sorts of things. But it was also impossible not to accept this bouquet, because it was clearly intended for her. She stood there in thought, not knowing what to do. Still, a solution was needed, so she said that when someone at the shelter received a good gift, they always shared it among everyone. In a more confident tone, she continued that she wanted to share this joy with everyone present without exception. Deborah complimented her on her generosity, and she responded that it was very beautiful and that she truly believed that such a moment should be shared with everyone. She took the bouquet in her hands, smiled slightly, and, looking encouragingly at those around her, added that let this not be only her gift. She understood that today it was important for her to show strength of spirit and confidence, because that was the only way she could maintain her honesty and dignity. The maids thanked her, and then one said that she would decorate her hat with it, and another decided to make a bookmark out of the flower. Our heroine didn't want to leave anyone out, so she also presented Madame Taylor with a flower as a symbol of attention and respect. The lady looked in surprise at the delicate flower that was handed to her and said, a little embarrassed, that it was a bouquet for a young lady. Smiling back, Sienna said that one flower was enough for her, especially since she still had this cute card. In response to the amazing gift, the tailor asked if the lady would like to accept a new dress sample. Seeing the surprise, she continued that this outfit demonstrates the style and craftsmanship of each studio and is representative in nature. Such items are released only once a season, and creating such a dress requires maximum diligence, just like sewing clothes for a princess. Every line, every button is thought out to the smallest detail, because this is not just clothing, but a true work of art. Craftswomen transform fabric into a masterpiece, pouring their soul and patience into each piece, and she asks to accept the pride of their studio. Sienna didn't know something so incredible existed, but she was confused by the fact that it was an eye-catching chicken color. She didn't know how to react. Fortunately, the maid came to the rescue again and expressed gratitude for such a generous gift. After turning to her charge, she added that with these clothes, the lady could start her classes right from the next day. However, Sienna didn't think that it would happen so soon. She was overcome with slight excitement and surprise at the same time. Deborah said that she thanked the archduke for listening to her opinion and understanding her heart, which wanted to give the lady a decent education. At that moment, the porn actress intervened, reminding them that they hadn't yet discussed everything regarding the rest of the clothes and offered to bring a catalog. Sienna, meanwhile, thought that if everything continued as before, the teacher would probably be the person who hated her, and it would be difficult to convince him of his hatred for her. It remained to be hoped that since she had arrived earlier, someone else would become the teacher. Suddenly, she listened to the women's conversation and heard what clothes she needed, and, as it turned out, there was a lot of them. There were 3 pajamas and a riding suit for going out and for everyday life, socks, robes, and underwear. The tailor showed the original price, and to her it seemed a fair price for the work, but Deborah only laughed in response. The owner of the studio could not even imagine that the archduke had signed a blank check, which he personally handed to the head maid. Her eyes widened in surprise and confusion, and she stared at the paper in amazement, as if hoping it was a mistake. Our heroine sighed and thought that this family really did have so much money that they would soon begin to rot, but that didn't concern her at all. Before Sienna had time to come to her senses, Deborah was already dragging her into the fitting room, hastily saying that everything would be ready in a moment. She beamed as if she was in a hurry to carry out the most important mission in her life, and then said contentedly that the dress suited the young lady very well. Then she happily added that today she would have a meeting with a teacher, and this dress was perfect for the beginning of a new stage in life. Looking at her reflection, Sienna thought the dress looked great, but she didn't believe that such a bright color would suit her. In addition to the luxurious design, she noticed that the buttons on the cotton collar were encrusted with precious stones. The ribbons and lace are of the highest quality, and in the future, if he sells it, he will be able to pay for 6 months of rent with this money. These thoughts were going through her head when the maid asked if it was time for them to go to the study room. Sienna agreed and decided that if she thought about it, it was quite a good purchase, like armor for going out onto the battlefield. And who could have thought that they would actually call the teacher the very next day? And Deborah compared her to a sprig of forsythia. Then our heroine thought it was stupid to argue about the design of the armor, but she was warmed by the thought that this dress would become her rent. For the first time since she arrived here, something good happened to her. She felt something unusual, a mixture of excitement and confidence. It was the first step towards a new chapter in her life, and she realized that despite all the surprises, something very significant was waiting ahead. And the first surprise was the young Lord Michael, who for some reason appeared in her study room, and she gasped in surprise. She didn't understand what he was doing here. Maybe he was interested in these lessons in particular, or he had his own reasons. Looking at her surprised face, he calmly said that he also came to listen to the lecture because he had to study. Sienna thought that if he wanted to study, then he should go to his classes. What the hell was he doing here, especially without warning? She really wanted to speak out, but she tried to remain calm because she generally had to act her age. Sitting down next to him, she put on a calm look, as if nothing was happening, then glanced at Michael and was surprised. She couldn't understand where he got that look from. She unconsciously compared it to a cat's, just as soft and slightly predatory. Michael looked at her outfit appraisingly and said that he heard that they had bought her new clothes and now she looked less like a country bumpkin. She mentally agreed with him, but she was happier that this dress cost as much as 6 months' rent. True, inside she thought that it didn't suit her at all. It was too pretentious and too bright, but she didn't want to look like a country bumpkin. At this moment, a new teacher appeared on the horizon, looking closely at the young lord, his face expressing some displeasure. He took a small step forward, bowed his head, and said that as far as he knew, he was only assigned to give lessons to the young lady. However, Michael was not so easily embarrassed. He calmly replied that he would not study, she would simply observe the lesson. He replied that it was clear then, and Sienna wondered if this was the same teacher, although she herself understood that she could hardly remember his face. The teacher introduced himself as Samuel Lowell and said that from that day on, he would be responsible for teaching the young lady, but she could call him Lowell. Sienna asked him to take care of her, thinking to herself that she didn't even remember the name at all. Perhaps it was a completely different person. The teacher looked at them carefully and said that before the start of lessons, he would ask them to fill out this small form. Let her write as much as she could, emphasizing the importance of effort and honesty, and Michael quickly grabbed his pen. He wrote confidently, without any particular difficulty, clearly accustomed to quick and neat writing, while Sienna, on the contrary, was in no hurry. To write letters for Lorraine, she worked hard on her handwriting, working on every stroke, every curve of the letters. In an effort to make it perfect, if she now decides to use her own handwriting, she risks arousing suspicion. She decided to write calmly and slowly, concentrating on making her hand look as clumsy but natural as possible. While she was getting ready, he had already finished. At that moment, she thought that this sudden test and the appearance of the young lord had thrown her off balance. Our heroine understood that now she had to write as childishly as possible, or even pretend that she didn't know the letters. Feeling his gaze on her, she thought that he had enough of staring at her like that. It hurt her pride, but she had no choice, and she began. Having started writing, I caught myself thinking that I had been worrying in vain, because this body had clearly never been involved in beautiful writing. Her hand moved a little clumsily, the letters were not perfect, and the alternation of lines was a little crooked and uneven. I made a few slightly haphazard strokes, hoping that it would be enough to make the handwriting appear random and imperfect. When she finished, she reported it and figured that the more ordinary her letter looked, the less likely it was to arouse suspicion. Michael congratulated her on her first attempt and thought she had done an excellent job, as expected of someone from their family. And she thought she had just received a compliment from a 10-year-old boy for filling out the answer sheet. After examining her writing, the teacher declared that at least she knew how to spell, although he did not quite understand what exactly she had written. Then, casually throwing the paper on the table, he added that she would need to practice her handwriting, as if it were just a small assignment. and she was already ready to be indignant. Our heroine had a desire to speak out and explain that it was not her fault that it was written so unevenly. However, this was not destined to happen. At that moment, another teacher appeared. He very politely apologized for interrupting their lesson. Michael jumped up nervously and asked why he had come, to which he received the answer that they were looking for him because he had not shown up for class. Sienna, thinking that he hadn't been attending his classes and had come here, heard his displeased question about why she was looking at him like that again. Without waiting for her answer, he continued that she should not be mistaken if she thought he came here because he was worried about her. The second teacher firmly pulled Michael towards him, reminding him that time was passing, lessons did not last forever, and it was time for them to get back to their own business. His movements were insistent and his words were decisive. If only the young lord had not forgotten how to write correctly. Having replied with dissatisfaction that he understood everything and was already on his way, the young gentleman shouted at Mr. Lowell that he should teach the lady well. There was even a hint of anger in his voice when he added that he shouldn't dare do anything stupid while he was away to keep an eye on him. The teacher grabbed his student and said that they would sort this out anyway, but if he continued to resist, he would have to be taken out by the ear. Michael couldn't calm down and asked who they thought he was, but his mentor still managed to cope with his protégé. When the phrase, "I apologize for the intrusion," was heard and the door closed from the other side, our heroine breathed a sigh of relief. But she felt relief literally for a moment. The next second she almost tangibly heard the seething words. One thing was clear to her. Someone was saying that they didn't know where this useless orphan came from, but she needed to stop bothering the young lord. Then it suddenly dawned on her. The light was blocked by the figure of the new teacher, and she suddenly remembered his face, his voice, even his manner. He said that she was a shameless girl who didn't know her place at all, and how come they hadn't gotten rid of her yet? It would be better if she just disappeared, and Sienna thought that it was still the same pompous speech, and it was even good that there were people who had not changed. She would have preferred this direct hostility to the sudden kindness that bordered on the loss of reason, their kindness like a noose. Mr. Lowell told her that it was time to stop being proud of herself, that she should come down from heaven to sinful earth and accept her place. He is a descendant of the archduke, the head of a great empire, and he cannot understand at all why he would get involved with such a worthless mudblood. A damn orphan who, apparently, doesn't understand what he's talking about, although what else can you expect from such a clueless girl? Moreover, without proper education, the archduke, the bravest and most loyal supporter of this empire, deserves exceptional praise. And the fact that such a great man decided to take care of an orphan like her only confirms the incredible mercy. He continued to praise the archduke, commenting on how adopting children from orphanages had become a popular trend. Our heroine, meanwhile, thought that she was pleased to see behavior that did not embarrass her, but she had heard this before. Does she really have to listen to these stupid speeches again? Like before, even though this man is a child from an orphanage, just like her. In a desperate attempt to get ahead, he even enlisted in the Imperial Army, but for some reason was soon demoted. She felt irritation mixed with fatigue. She knew all these words, all these attempts to justify herself, heard more than once. Unable to contain herself, she said that something had become curious in conversation. He constantly pointed out her origin. Doesn't this mean that he is ashamed of himself? When he asked again, she said that it was probably true and that she had not made a mistake in her assessment. Although he must know that most people believe that their weakness hurts others as much as it hurts them. Having told all this, she added with a slight smile, as if slightly lifting the corners of her lips, that she thought he thought so too. This was the last straw. It completely drove him crazy. His face turned slightly red and his eyes flashed with an inner fire. He seemed to spit out the word devil, and a firm determination appeared in his gaze. Grabbing her hand, he decided that he would now teach her a lesson. She felt his grip. The tension in his face grew, and at that moment she realized that she had succeeded in driving the teacher crazy. A feeling of triumph flared inside him. Just one small move, one word, and he already looked like he was about to lose control. For her purposes, only one blow was enough for her to change her mentor, and she prepared for the final chord. And it sounded. The archduke entered and demanded that it stop, his voice, stern and cold, cutting through the tense atmosphere. The archduke stared at the teacher, his unblinking gaze as cold as an icy storm cloud. He watched closely as the arrogant mentor suddenly turned white, as if he had seen a ghost, and his eyes widened in fear. He tried to justify himself, and his breathing quickened slightly, because he understood that if he made such a mistake, the consequences would be severe. The head maid, who had finally assessed the situation, called her young charge, her voice firm. Sienna broke free from his grip and threw herself into Deborah's arms, like a beacon of light in a storm. At that moment, her mentor began to make excuses, babbling that everything was completely wrong, that it was all just an unfortunate misunderstanding. But as soon as he noticed that no one was interrupting him, he began to insist that everything happened because she herself was to blame. His voice grew louder and more sullen, and he began to assert that the young lady had insulted him first, even that she had used foul language. His tone grew increasingly heated, filled with self-satisfaction and irritation, as if he had forgotten the role he was supposed to play. Sienna listened and was amazed, because he was the one who started it. He poured dirt on her from head to toe, and now he decided to simply set her up. Confused, she looked at the Archduke and their eyes met. He still looked imperturbably unapproachable. There was a coldness in his eyes, such a coldness that for a moment she felt a slight shiver run down her spine. She couldn't understand what he was thinking, as if his mind was beyond her comprehension. Had he really misunderstood what had just happened? She thought that even if nothing serious happened now, she was already very tired of being set up. She had an unbearable desire to correct this situation, to turn the tide of events and to show that she was worthy of being taken into account. Running up to the Archduke, she carefully pulled at his sleeve, as if she was afraid that her voice would never be heard. He turned his gaze towards her, and a flash of surprise flashed in his eyes, because usually she avoided him, kept her distance from him, did not allow any direct contact. Today she dared to take a step, and he could not even imagine how much this situation frightened her, that she decided to do such a thing. He wanted to help her, to show support, but the fear that this might frighten or scare her even more made him hesitate. He saw how difficult it was for her, as if she was struggling within herself with something very difficult, as if she was hiding something behind her external isolation. The teacher began again to say that he was truly innocent, but the Archduke, with a wave of his hand, asked him not to continue. Turning to his assistant, he ordered him to check how many lives this teacher had in reserve. Devon didn't need to be asked twice. Mr. Lowell couldn't believe that he was being treated like this because of some orphan. His eyes widened with indignation and incomprehension, although he realized that in this world such decisions are made quickly and harshly, and his slightest weakness could be fatal. Devon, meanwhile, muttered that it so happened that the legal status of wards had been the subject of heated debate for many years. In some homes, they work alongside the rest of the servants, while other families take in orphans as if they were their own children. And nothing can be done about this fact, because the Nacht family belongs to the category that treats Sienna as a blood daughter. She is protected and looked after, which means that any blow to her is a blow to the whole family, and first and foremost to the prestige and dignity of Nacht. Therefore, for such behavior he will pay a very high price, and not only in terms of the severity of punishment, but also in terms of reputation. In their world, honor and respect do not forgive mistakes, especially if they come from those who, for some reason, put themselves above others. The Archduke watched Sienna's reaction carefully, his gaze gently sliding over her face, trying to catch every subtle change. He saw her timid behavior, the inner anxiety that still lurked behind her reserved expression. He sincerely felt sorry that she was still not getting used to her new home, to this new life, full of trials and unfamiliar rules. He knew that genuine respect for her independence was essential for her to feel secure and trusting. Nevertheless, he understood that he could not impose his desire on the child, even if it was dictated by the best intentions. So he decided to take a step back, give her time and space to find her own way in this new world. And before leaving, he asked Deborah to take care of the young lady and let her rest. In response, the maid asked the gentleman not to worry. Our heroine looked after him and thought that this was probably the most incredible thing that had ever happened to her in her life. In a matter of moments, her world changed, as if someone had opened a door to another reality, where she suddenly became a significant figure. She tried not to think about it, because if she started to put meaning into everything that was happening, then there would be no end to it. However, thoughts still revolved around the fact that if you put everything together, then questions remain as to why the Archduke took her side. Why does he treat her so kindly, as if she really were their own daughter, if only they could just believe and accept her? but she felt that one day the vessel would overflow, and this whole flow of emotions, expectations, and promises would shift beyond the bounds of the familiar. And she wasn't sure that she could cope with the consequences. She didn't know if she could bear the burden of these new feelings for her. She felt uneasy, and only time could tell whether all this would become a hope or turn into another disappointment. Deborah was very worried and said in her heart, how could the teacher do something like that and treat the lady of this family in such a way? She couldn't get her head around the fact that she had witnessed something like this. Then she asked the girl if she was hurt anywhere, if nothing hurt. But Sienna didn't want to answer. She didn't even want to think about it, but there was still a problem that she needed to solve. Plucking up her courage, she asked the maid to tell her more about the pomegranate tradition, and she wondered why now. It was a bit unexpected, but then she thought that this question arose in the context of the incident because of the teacher's similar treatment. Deborah said that, as the young lord had already said, the family crest of the House of Nacht depicts a pomegranate, so receiving it from the head of the family. It signifies blessing and recognition, but our heroine understood that this was too little information, anything more than a superficial meaning. Meanwhile, the maid said that in fact this was an old family custom, so that was all she personally knew. After all, she is an outsider to such details, and if the lady is interested, then why not ask young Lord Michael? But our heroine found this somewhat tactless, and she was about to express her opinion when the young lord appeared at the door. He flew in so briskly that Deborah simply couldn't help but remind him that one should never forget the simple rules of etiquette. Having said that he would be right back, he turned to the door, walking not hastily but decorously and carefully, with an expression of exemplary behavior. Then, apologizing, he rushed away, his footsteps echoing in the corridor as if a whole brood of monsters were chasing him. It seemed as if he was about to shed his former fussiness and emerge as the embodiment of politeness and respect. Just a few moments later he reappeared, quiet and smooth, slightly embarrassed with the look of a naughty kitten. His movements became careful, and a timid hope for forgiveness could be seen in his eyes, but this performance quickly ended. He became himself again and started babbling that he had heard everything, and he didn't like him right away. He behaved arrogantly and spoke rather strangely. The ladies looked at him in surprise. Then he explained that he was talking about the teacher. If he had been there and protected them, this would not have happened. Deborah thought that he was so kind, and our heroine thought that their ill-mannered gentleman was talking some kind of utter nonsense. Then, sighing, she said that everything was fine, to which he flared up, wondering how this could even be considered remotely normal. Seeing her upset expression, he quickly apologized, remembering that etiquette required him to speak calmly and politely. And he calmly informed her that in any case, she had already received instructions from her father, realizing that Sienna had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. He explained that now she would study with him for some time until her situation stabilized, or until her father decided otherwise. His voice sounded a little cocky, but there was a hidden concern in it. He didn't want Sienna to feel lonely. Her eyes widened in surprise. Then he added that it might be difficult for her to keep up with his program, but what could she do? What if they find a new teacher, and he turns out to be even worse? His arguments were perfectly logical, but that didn't make things any easier for her. She looked at his inspired face and wondered if she would have to spend every day with a man she was avoiding. Michael asked her, a little annoyed, not to make such a face, and asked if it was because she wanted to make him uncomfortable. When, without waiting for her answer, he added, "It's commendable, of course, but everything has already been decided," she became interested in what he had thought up again. The young lord said, slightly arrogantly, that if something bad happened to her again, she would again endure it in silence. With eyes full of amazement and quiet horror, she looked straight at him, trying to understand how he had found out about this. Michael chuckled and said that, judging by her reaction, he had hit the nail on the head, but he couldn't let that happen again. Feeling that his mission was essentially accomplished, he calmly added that in any case, his father would be more careful in his selection. And while she was studying with him, she said that then she could just wait a little until the new teacher arrived. He categorically replied that this would not happen because there were still people who looked at her as an ordinary orphan. Doesn't she want to show them that she is outstanding enough by getting an education in a short time? And she said that she is not interested in such things. She thought to herself that she didn't have a hobby of building sandcastles, that one day the waves would wash her away, and if she did something wrong, her body would be washed away too. At that moment, she didn't care at all whether she was despised or not, and Michael didn't miss her dejected mood. He didn't like it. Having sharply shouted that she was, the young lord quickly stopped himself and apologized for being too hot-tempered, but was trying very hard to control himself. However, when she indifferently replied that everything was fine, he couldn't help but ask throughout the room if she knew any other words. Without waiting for her answer, he announced that it was time for them to go to the classroom, and thus, a few minutes later, they were in class. And they looked at Seth, who was responsible for Michael's training, and he said that he was pleased that he would be studying with her for some time. He asked her to take care of him, then she thought that he was quite nice and friendly with her, although she recently disrupted his lesson. And yet, despite this, Seth did not hold a grudge against her, but communicated in a friendly, calm, and affectionate manner, as if there had been no misunderstanding. He was tolerant and supportive, and it seemed that it was important to him not only to teach his students, but also to create an atmosphere of trust. In the same balanced tone, he noted that since the lady already knew spelling, he would teach them a course in magic. Then Sienna, a little hesitantly, said that she could read, and even quite well, but she had great difficulties with beautiful writing. She added that her previous teacher had strongly advised her to practice writing, otherwise no one would be able to properly decipher her scribbles. Seth looked at her, remembering that man, and asked her to forget everything he had told her, and another teacher would take care of her general education. A little thoughtfully, he assured her that he was ready to help her overcome any difficulties, and that she would grasp everything herself as she studied. Afterwards, he asked her if she didn't feel sorry for wasting precious time on spelling when there was so much interesting stuff around. Michael, in turn, advised our heroine not to let herself be deceived. In fact, he would overwhelm her with studies and training to the point of death. Thanking the young lord for his advice, she thought that this was just what she needed. She had missed out on a lot in her past life. Then she said thank you to the teacher, because she was extremely grateful that there were people who were ready to teach her with all seriousness. And although both the teacher and the student were surprised, she understood that if she was going to enter the academy, this training would help her in the future. Sienna didn't share her thoughts out loud, but this small thanks was already enough for her new teacher. He couldn't believe his luck, because he finally had a model student. Michael tore him away from these thoughts. Having asked rather abruptly if the teacher was going to teach the lesson, Seth then began by explaining the general direction of the lesson. He said that magic is a supernatural phenomenon that is created by a person who, in turn, possesses magical powers. In their world, energy called mana spreads around, and movement in this energy is called magical flow. Sometimes an evil spirit penetrates into places where the magical flow accumulates, and then a magical monster appears. Their strength depended on how strong the magical flow was that was disturbed, and how dark the essence of the infiltrating spirit was. He continued his story that these monsters, from the very moment of their birth, instinctively know how to control this mana, and in order to distinguish their magical power from human power, they began to call it spiritual. That is, people have magical powers, and monsters have spiritual powers, and after wiping the board, he asked if the students had any questions left. At that moment, he was struck by the new pupil, who, without raising her head, was taking notes in her clumsy handwriting. He wondered if such exemplary students really existed and was terribly worried about it. He tried to calm himself down mentally, telling himself that he shouldn't give in to his feelings, but Michael still didn't let him relax. He kept bringing the teacher back to earth with his comments, and he continued that magicians were extremely vulnerable to their own power. Therefore, the basis of magic is stabilization. In other words, they learn to use magic in a way that does not lead to madness. And not to become a magical monster, and they, being magicians, will constantly face this danger. The Lord noted that this is cruel. Our heroine, not paying attention to Michael's remarks, continued to write everything down, trying not to miss anything that was said. Seth glanced at her and continued that, of course, there was already a whole generation of mages pursuing the idea of stabilizing mana. So they don't need to worry. These are healing-type mages who are called terraformers. Simply put, these are people who help other mages use their powers freely without fear of turning into a monster. Putting down the chalk, the teacher announced that he had just given them a brief overview of the contents of the magic textbook up to page 135. And the two of them will have to make a one-page summary of the first half of the book based on his story. He finished by saying that this was their homework, at which point Michael perked up and asked if there would be enough time until next week. Without answering his question, Seth, looking at his diligent student, explained that, of course, they couldn't share their notes. The young lord said it was cruel ignoring him. The teacher asked Sienna if she had any difficulty understanding the material, or he gave too much homework, to which she answered him that no, because it was just writing about what he told her today. She added that she understood everything and would try to do it, and with these words she inspired the mentor. He understood that there are ideal students. What happens in life, I asked her out loud not to overdo it and just do as much as she could. Then, with a slight breath, he added that she was his dear, exemplary student, and his behavior plunged the young lord into despondency. But our heroine didn't care at all how Michael reacted to this. She wanted to delve into studying the material as quickly as possible. I told myself that I needed to look at my homework up to page 135 and stopped when I reached the terraformer. Terraformers subjugate space and claim it as their territory, thereby clearing it within their reach. After reading her homework, she thought with a slight joy in her soul that for the first time she had the opportunity to study magic. In her past life, she was constantly despised, and then it all ended with Lorraine stealing her magical power from her. Thus, she became a completely useless burden who did not even need to be trained, and now she was back to square one. It took her a long and thorny path, full of humiliation and disappointment, just for this moment. But she thought it was worth it. Now she stood on the threshold of her new life, which she hoped would be brighter than the past. Aseel took a deep breath and felt the scent of spring in the air, the light breath of the warm sun, which was only just gaining strength. Even though the wind was still icy and bone-chilling, these signs of awakening nature were a reminder of change. He paused for a moment, closing his eyes and allowing himself to feel the contrast. He was still at Saiwan Academy. Not paying attention to the conversations of his classmates, all his thoughts were focused on the arriving postman bird. One of them reminded Aseel in a displeased tone that in such clear weather it was better not to send letters by sky. It was dangerous. Aseel, unfazed, merely raised an eyebrow slightly, making it clear that he didn't really have a choice, and then carefully crumpled the message. His interlocutor chuckled and dryly remarked that lately news from home had been coming to the young lord every day. And then he asked if something had happened, and when he heard the answer that nothing had happened, he thought that his friend was still as taciturn as ever. It seemed to him almost childish naivety, the stubbornness with which Aseel hoped to receive news. It was impossible not to notice it. So he asked if Aseel would also be going home this weekend, and he, without answering the question directly, said that it was time for them to go. Another fair-haired classmate quietly asked the Lord to show him his report on architecture, but he, smiling slightly, apologized. He didn't even start it because he couldn't collect his thoughts. His words sounded honest. He was used to admitting his weaknesses. But in the room, something completely different was visible. There was already a whole tower of books on construction, stacked and covered with notes. To this remark, the Lord merely replied that his friend also stacked letters from Duke Ferrato in the same way, and no one said that they had not been read. Aseel didn't pay any attention to the exclamation that he was disgusting. All his thoughts were about how he would spend his weekend at the estate. It took our heroine 3 days to complete her homework, and she had no idea she would enjoy it so much. Michael snatched up one of the neatly folded sheets of paper and immediately commented that its letters looked good and were quite legible. Then, raising his hands a little theatrically, he added that if you look at it that way, his soul has no talent for learning at all. Deborah said that the young lady was working so hard to repay the house for its kindness, and that it was truly commendable. Sienna looked at the headmaid with some distrust and wondered why they were talking like that and why they decided everything for her. She didn't understand why Michael was pretending like that, because she knew from the past that he was a very capable student. Since his entry into the military academy, he has consistently held a leading position and has only received top marks. She sincerely believed that, compared to him, she was a rather untalented student who, moreover, wrote like a chicken with a paw. Yet she was having fun. It was an exciting experience. For the first time in her life, she was learning magic, and every discovery filled her with delight. In this world of knowledge and magic, she felt that although she was not the most talented, she was trying very hard and it brought her pleasure. Every day was full of new challenges and discoveries. It became an adventure for her, and she happily enjoyed every moment. Deborah, watching her, thought, well, the young lady who only slept and ate almost nothing upon arriving at the estate had changed so much, and she was so inspired by her studies, but on the other hand, the maid felt a little sorry that the girl devoted all her free time to studying. Opening the window, she noticed that gaining new knowledge was commendable and wonderful, but the weather outside was so beautiful. And it would be a sin not to enjoy the spring, where warm rays play in the sunlight, and the freshness of awakening nature is already in the air. This day called for simple happiness, for a walk in the garden where flowers are just beginning to bloom and the trees are covered with delicate greenery. Lord Asriel walked quietly through the doors of his estate, feeling the freshness of the spring air, and was greeted by loyal servants. His gaze was full of some kind of inner light, only he knew how much returning home meant to his heart these days. The butler, helpfully helping, unobtrusively noted that recently the young lord had been returning home every weekend. 3 years have passed since the gentleman entered the military academy, but only now did he learn that he could return to the estate so often. Asriel smiled mysteriously and asked in response what the butler was hinting at, that he was an ungrateful child. His slight fatigue gave way to the warmth of inner inspiration. His meeting with his native estate was now special. Seeing where the young master was going, the old servant said that if he was heading to the cradle of the moon, he would not find anyone there, because the young lady has recently become interested in studying, and therefore at this time she is most likely in the study room. This remark made Asriel realize that this staircase did not lead to his room, but he had unconsciously intended to go to Sienna's chambers. Suddenly, he felt like he was losing control when it came to her, like there was a strong tension he couldn't quite suppress. Just like when he beat up the director of the orphanage, he stopped, realizing that his feelings and thoughts were beginning to go beyond the usual rules. It was an unsettling feeling, but also strangely alluring, as if he couldn't shake off this need to be close. He tried to answer himself the question why, because those frightened eyes touched his heart so much, but they were not frightened. Rather, it was a look that rejected him, and he was terrified that he had shown his cruel side to a child with such eyes. Then Asriel thought that he should avoid her for a while, just for now, and continue to learn about her condition through letters. The butler stopped his movement and said that he had ordered a message to be sent to him every day with a report on the condition of the young lady. He added that recently she had even been sent a bouquet to lift her spirits. There was concern in his voice, and he himself felt the same anxiety. Go on. If the gentleman is so worried about the young lady, wouldn't it be better to see her in person to make sure everything is okay? Asriel felt a slight pang of conscience, after which, nodding slightly, he said that he thought he should ask if she liked the flowers. In response, he heard how she shared the bouquet with everyone, and it was so generous of her, he must definitely tell her about it. Looking after the departing heir, the old servant thought he saw before him exactly the ideal lord whom everyone respected. The man, an extremely rational bone marrow, had the impression that he controlled every muscle in his body. He was even called the firstborn sent from heaven, because everything indicated that there was something divinely perfect in him. But when it came to the young lady Sienna, his system suddenly began to fail, rationality disappeared, giving way to the unknown. The thought flashed through the old servant's mind that even such a cold-blooded man was not immune to weaknesses and what awaited the archduchy in the future. Deborah stood quietly by the window, lost in thought about her pupil, and in the depths of her soul she noted her diligence and zeal. At that moment, her attention was drawn to a man walking down the street. He was dressed in the uniform of the estate, but she could not determine which one. However, she immediately realized that he was not a postman. This man was clearly destined for a special mission. Otherwise, why would they send a servant? She felt that there was something very important and significant in this, but she could not pinpoint exactly what it was. Suddenly, Asriel appeared, his steps confident, and in his eyes that same calm determination that always inspired respect in her. He stepped into the doorway and looked around quickly, and she asked him calmly, with a hint of curiosity, why he was there. Guessing with my gut that he was unlikely to be looking for his younger brother, I told him that Lady Sienna was out for a walk. Having briefly stated that he understood, he looked around the study room again and noted that perfect order and organization reigned there. I thought that at first glance it seemed like she was actually being treated like a child of the Nacht family and not an orphan. He said a little thoughtfully that he had also used this room for studying as a child, and that it seemed like nothing had changed here since then. In response, Deborah said that the room was located closest to the moon's cradle, so it was given to the young lady for use. Then she added that the table and chair that had served the young master as before were still standing here. He thought that she was now using this furniture and probably felt quite comfortable in this cozy space. But at the same time, he realized that he shouldn't try to force a feeling of closeness with her. This could only complicate the situation. His gaze suddenly fell on the flower. He looked at it closely, and in the blink of an eye his face changed. A slight look of surprise and concern crossed his eyes, as if this small detail could open the door to something important. But it was just one flower, like one bouquet, a thing that could be sent even to enemies in case of extreme necessity. And this small, ordinary gift went to a girl, very young, who had recently come to them from an orphanage. Perhaps she didn't even yet understand that the words of warmth and hope were sent to her from the Lord himself, albeit unspoken. In fact, he didn't have any special meaning. He simply gave what was needed, soullessly and without much thought. He easily and quickly forgot about it, as if it were something insignificant. But why then did his heart squeeze so hard, as if it would burst? In this internal contradiction he felt completely confused, as if some inexplicable melancholy had taken possession of him. He found it difficult to understand why it hurt so much, as if he had lost something very important, although he himself could not pinpoint exactly what it was. A slight shudder ran through his body, and Deborah, not understanding how the flower ended up on the floor, said that she must have dropped it by accident. Perhaps while cleaning, she suddenly decided to apologize for her carelessness, admitting that everything that happened was only her fault. She spoke quietly, almost in a whisper, and added that she would gladly accept any punishment to correct the mistake and justify the trust. However, when he said not to be angry, the head maid was surprised, and one could read genuine bewilderment on her face. Asil felt as if he was trapped inside his own obscure and confusing trap, and asked not to tell Sienna that he had come in. He saw the flower again, and suddenly felt a sense of déjà vu wash over him, as if something similar had happened to him before. This little thing and his own perception, part of something long familiar, but hidden in the depths of memory, which he cannot remember exactly. Suddenly, Asil realized that everything that was happening was not a coincidence at all, but a repetition of something important, but he did not have time to understand what exactly. Because a messenger ran in and announced that a letter had arrived from the county of Gildenjak, signed, and that it was connected with Kesseros. At that moment, an incredible commotion began in the estate. Previously, there had been silence, which suddenly exploded with noise and movement. Our heroine could not understand why everyone was fussing so much, why the servants rushed to open the doors, why someone was whispering loudly. Her face expressed complete bewilderment. She could not understand what exactly had happened that was so important while she was on a walk in the garden. She was even glad when she saw Michael, and he was able to tell her that everything was fine, because a letter had arrived from the county of Gildenjak. This really couldn't explain everything to her. Then the Lord explained that it was about the flame of Kesseros, which she had seen earlier in the exhibition hall. She remembered that he had told her then that the names were not just ancient relics, they were necessary for fighting monsters. Michael said that, as he had already said, the named chooses a suitable owner for itself, but any magician can challenge the right of ownership. If he did not choose it for himself, then the Count's daughter decided to challenge this right to Kesseros, which previously had no owner. Then our heroine thought that before only Lorraine had dealt with the flame of Kesseros, no one else had made such attempts. She became curious, because this was an unexpected turn of events, and she thought that if the past had not changed, then she knew this man. Count Gildenjak was a man who pursued only his own interests, but at the same time he simply always went with the flow. A variable has appeared in her present. A person from her past life suddenly does something that he never even intended to do before. If there is a variable that can change the past and the present, it is her, because she just chose a different path. She tried to imagine how events would have unfolded, the withdrawn archduke taking care of her, a poor orphan, and even if he gave her a garnet, the countess could well reason that her daughter was no worse, and it was worth making every effort to give her a chance. Perhaps in her soul there are thoughts growing that it is worth trying to be noticed, to earn his trust, and this is an opportunity to get out of the shadows. Sienna remembered that Count and Countess Gildenjak had had a big fight with Lorena in the past, and then soon committed suicide. Asil thoughtfully asked if his father's glory had faded recently, to which the butler replied that such a thing was, in principle, impossible. Last year, Hesseros was in the possession of Getter, and the story of crossing the battlefield with the head of the demonic beast spread widely. Then he continued, but the state of affairs of the Archduchy was too attractive to think about its glory. Moreover, the lord was a promising potential groom, to which Asil replied that the ward was not obliged to marry the son of the family. The old servant noted that they still believed that the position guaranteed marriage with the lord, and Asil realized that the problem was still in him. When the butler asked what he planned to do, the gentleman replied that he first needed to tell his father that he was fighting monsters. He understood that now was not the best time for such a message, but he said out loud that the appearance of the master at the name was for the common good, and since there is no reason to refuse the sacred challenge, the challenger must be treated accordingly. There's little even a father can do here, especially when we're talking about a man who wants to demonstrate his skills in a test. To himself, the young lord thought that regardless of the circumstances that developed in the future, the Nacht family would have only one ward. Sienna timidly approached the high shelf and tried to get the book, stretching on tiptoe, hoping that she would still be able to reach it. But the hand never reached the right place, as if an invisible wall mockingly separated it from the treasured book. She staggered a little, stretching her arm as far as she could, but still couldn't overcome this seemingly small barrier. Her gaze slid awkwardly along the top shelf, and a slight disappointment flashed in her eyes. She didn't think it would be so difficult. In despair, she thought that just recently the maids and even Madame Deborah had been running around all the time, constantly looking after her. But as soon as this stupid letter arrived from the county of Gildenjack, everyone immediately became alarmed and seemed to have forgotten about her existence. The new maid, whom Deborah introduced to her, doesn't even show her nose, as if she doesn't pay any attention to those around her. Her face was difficult to remember. It seemed she was unable to leave any lasting impression, as if she had been lost in the crowd. However, our heroine knew that this could no longer affect her. Although it was no different from the past, everything was as it was before. She found herself alone again, without much hope or expectation, as if the same threads of confusion and indifference were still bound within her. Continuing to think, she tried to understand why this world was so cruel to her, and without being distracted from her attempt, she moved the chair under the shelf. Climbing onto it on tiptoe, she once again extended her hand, hoping to finally reach the desired volume. But at the most inopportune moment, the chair shook, and a loud crash was heard under her feet. The chair collapsed, breaking the silence of the room. She was surprised by this unusual silence. She didn't even expect that she would get used to the constant attention and company so quickly. It seems like just recently everything seemed noisy and full of conversations, and now suddenly everything has disappeared, giving way to a quiet despondency. She felt a strange shock in such a short time. She had already gotten used to always being needed by someone, and suddenly she found herself alone. It was like an unexpected reminder of how quickly everything changes around us, and that even silence can surprise us when it has been so long since it was there. It turns out that she got used to unwanted attention so quickly, and for her it was the most humiliating thing she was so afraid of. I decided that I needed to focus and stop reopening old wounds. If I focused on books and magic, my mind would calm down on its own. A strong determination was born in her thoughts to distract herself from everything unnecessary and make sure that silence and peace reigned within. But at the same time, she thought that she was most skilled at deceiving a sick heart by hiding her feelings in the depths of her soul. These tricks made her feel stronger, because nothing hides vulnerability better than the art of deceiving oneself. Dusk was falling over the Nacht estate, heavy clouds on the horizon obscuring the last rays of the setting sun. There was a special silence inside the estate, as if every corner held its breath, awaiting what would come next. At that moment, it might have seemed as if time had stood still, and all life around was frozen in anticipation of the upcoming events. Our heroine was hungry. She realized that everyone had forgotten about her and was starving her. She was sad that nothing had changed since then. She felt like she had in her past life, lonely and abandoned, but this time she had some advantages. Now she knew where she could find food. She was lucky. It was already late, so she found herself completely alone in the kitchen. However, this did not bother her. Her attention was drawn to the fresh buns, and she even thought that it would be better if she took a couple just in case. She thought that no one knew. Maybe under the current circumstances she wouldn't be able to eat later, so she needed to stock up. There was a slight noise behind her, and turning around, she saw Aziel standing in the doorway with a surprised expression on his face. He was also hungry and did not expect to see her here at all. Each of them felt a little awkward for a while. Both sides felt a slight tension from the sudden meeting at that moment, and she was the first to quietly mutter, "Lord Aziel." When he asked why she was there, she had no choice but to answer that she was hungry and happened to be passing by. Aziel said with concern that the Nacht estate had many magical devices and hidden passages, so it would be easy to get lost here. Adding that there were even missing people, he asked how it was possible that the servants could leave her alone to wander in such a place. But she herself did not know the answer, because the passage she used was just one of those hidden ones. It's a safe passage she learned about while working as a maid, causing workers to gossip about hearing footsteps. When the Lord asked why the head maid had not taken care of her food, she replied that Madame was busy and had assigned another maid to her. True, she didn't quite understand why he was asking her questions at all, but he said that Deborah was indeed preparing to meet the Countess. Having asked where the maid assigned to her had gone and why she was alone in the kitchen, he wondered with horror whether she had been left to starve. Then his thoughts turned in that direction. If she knew where the kitchen was, then this wasn't the first time this had happened. He shuddered at the thought that she couldn't stand the hunger, so she came here to find something on her own. What upset and infuriated him most was that all this was happening right in the Nacht estate, in a place where strictness and order were supposed to reign. He swore quietly and said that first she needed to go back to her room, and he would definitely solve everything, and everything would definitely be fine. Stepping back, our heroine thought that the reason she believed Aziel wouldn't hate her was only because of her stupidity. Because he is cold and draws a line with everyone, she remembered that once in a past life she gave him many amulets. At least she hoped that he would not discount her efforts and consider her a fool, but now she knew that it was all in vain. His words, "Sienna, your efforts are useless," were etched into her memory, and now she could only scold herself for her blind faith and foolish hope. She didn't want to reveal the true reasons for her detachment, so she said she didn't want other people to be scolded because of her. The Lord replied that no one would be punished and offered to take her to her room, but she refused, saying that she could walk there herself. At that moment, a clear thought arose that his guess was correct, and she was really afraid of him, hiding her fears behind a mask of calm. The butler appeared at the threshold and said that he was looking for the master, but he could not even imagine that there would be a young lady in the kitchen. Aziel understood that any noise could attract unnecessary attention and decided to avoid any misunderstandings and idle talk. Quietly and sternly, he asked the old servant to take the girl to her room, making it clear that this situation required special care. The butler, without further questions, invited the young lady to follow him to his room, showing respect and calm. Already on the way out, he heard the gentleman's words that she was starving. These words sounded quietly but very clearly, leaving no room for misinterpretation. In the same tense whisper, Aziel asked her to find out who had left her unattended and deal with it herself. There was determination and hidden anxiety in his voice. He understood that this state of affairs was unacceptable, and the butler agreed with him. As he watched them go, he thought his anxiety was like confirmation that behind her mask lay much deeper and more terrible fears. Now he was sure that those emotions in her eyes, the same as before, meant that Sienna was frightened not only by what happened back then in the orphanage. The Lord clearly understood that it was not only about the events she was trying to forget, and he felt a strong desire to understand everything. Carriages slowly approached the estate, their wheels clacking loudly on the pavement, echoing in the courtyard, and the air filled with a slight excitement. The servants ran out to the front door. In a bustle, a loud voice was heard near the door, announcing that the guests had arrived. Soon the sound of a bell was heard in the courtyard, and the arrivals began to emerge from the carriages, their faces shining with anticipation and curiosity. Young Lady Isabel Gildenjack curtsied gracefully and greeted young Lord Aziel. Then she added that even with such a sudden request, he agreed and allowed her to come, for which she expressed gratitude. Her mother, the Countess, said that her daughter had greeted her so beautifully that she had nothing more to add to it. Having invited them into the house, Aziel thought that she was praising her daughter from the very beginning, but her true goal was more than clear to him. He understood that he would have to closely monitor her every action, because the Countess could be weaving her own plans. They walked slowly along the majestic corridors, the walls of which were decorated with rich stucco and portraits of ancestors. Light streamed softly through the tall windows, giving the whole place a sense of historical importance, as if everything here held secrets. When young Isabel practically sang that attending dinner at the Noct family home was like a dream, Michael frowned with displeasure. And he muttered, "Yeah, right," not paying attention to it. His companion said that it was even more exciting than the upcoming test itself. In response, the young lord managed to squeeze out the same short, "uh-huh," and then his brother thought that Michael was trying no matter what. Some time ago, he asked his brother why these guests had come, in his opinion, to take away the place from Sienna, and he admitted that he didn't like it. Asil couldn't yet fully explain his thoughts to his brother, but he was obliged to express his request. He told him that as the heir to the house, he officially asked him to try and meet the Countess and her daughter impeccably. He himself did not like this whole idea, but as a representative of the house, he understood that he was obliged to keep up appearances and follow the instructions. He knew that the estate's reputation depended on his behavior, and so he tried to remain calm, but even he was not entirely successful. Michael somehow inexplicably found himself in front and was already going full blast in front of Sienna, which completely threw him off balance. His brother seemed to be consumed by the desire to impress at any cost, and this only added to Asil's inner tension. Watching them, he thought that it was not only Michael's affection, it seemed to him that they had truly become friends. There was a spark of trust and ease in their looks and movements that he hadn't noticed before. With an inexplicable heaviness in his chest, he wondered if she had really opened her heart to his little brother.